Hello, welcome to the Now Granted podcast. My name is Ryan, and here we go.
Welcome tonight to the Now Granted podcast. I am Mikey, joined by my two co-hosts, Kevin and Ryan, and tonight we have a special guest. He is an engineer by education, he is a bartender by hobby, and temporarily a caterer by profession. Please welcome William Lefebvre.
Well, hi there, everybody.
Yeah.
Hey, Will.
Hello, how are you doing tonight?
All right, so I'm doing great. How's everybody else doing?
Fantastic.
You stole my word, Kevin. Fantastic. It's usually my word, but I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I'm glad we can finally get you on.
Yeah, it's good to be on. Mikey's told me a little bit about this podcast and when you guys started it, and I was offered up my opposing opinions, I should say, for to join in on the discussion, to add some banter and dialogue. So hopefully we can have a good conversation and maybe make everybody better and save the world while we're at it.
Well, I don't know about saving the world, but make us better. I'm down for that offer. So.
Well, you make my world better just by being in it, Mikey.
Oh, fantastic!
Oh,
thank you, Will. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure that you were brought on to continue the love fest with Mikey, so let's move on from that. He doesn't need any more stroking of his ego.
Well, all right, Ryan. Anything that for you are the engineer of the podcast? What do we have on the plate for tonight? Or at least what's on the top of your head?
Not a whole lot. I was kind of hoping for you guys to come up with some of that stuff. I was working on some of the more technical aspects. So what do we got on tap tonight, gentlemen?
Well, tonight the things that have kind of flowed through my the empty hole between my two ears, would be that from what I've heard, South Korea is planning on opening at least an embassy satellite in North Korea throughout the discussions. That's something that just kind of came across my table today. Also, the hurricane. What's this hurricane that's coming up hitting the south coast?
Florence.
Florence is hitting hitting the east coast, eastboard of the United States, and other few things in the news. So. And then something that I just recently learned is that Malaysia is planning on reopening their embassy in North Korea, despite the attacks, I believe, a year or two ago on Kim Jong-un's half-brother when he was assassinated in their airport. So that's something interesting.
So
I don't know about you, Kevin.
Just to kind of issue a real-time correction on Mikey, he was close. But the office that they opened up is called a full-time liaison office.
Oh, okay.
So that's at the border. I believe that helps to facilitate government officials and other people crossing.
Okay.
But yeah, that's.
Oh, I was wrong.
You were close.
But,
like I said.
I mean that is a step forward, I'd say in the relations between South Korea and North Korea.
In a lot of ways, it's actually a more promising sign. The facility will be staffed by personnel from both countries. So they're actually going to have to work together with each other on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, the New York Times article I'm reading is saying that it establishes the first channel for full-time person-to-person contact between the two countries. Since they went to war back in the 50s.
Yeah. All right. I mean, I
can thank our president for that.
Well, I think that we can thank his rhetoric for it. While it was rather scary for some people. I do believe that it had a massive effect in bringing about these negotiations.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Will?
Sorry, I had my mic turned off for a second there. I mean, it's hard to say if for sure whether his rhetoric had a direct impact, but I mean, it's hard to argue that it had no impact, or how much of an impact it, exactly his rhetoric had, and whether it helped things along or slowed things down. I mean, it's hard to exactly say.
Would you agree that at the very least his willingness to engage with them probably had some positive impacts?
I mean, definitely a willingness to engage, and actually going and meeting with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. I mean, it's definitely a huge step forward, and I think that some of the things that has happened, that he's done, has helped facilitate some of the conversation. Some of the things he's done and said probably backtracked a few things, but overall we can't argue that it's definitely moved forward.
And that's pretty incredible to hear. I know that if you look at the news, it seems like pretty much a doom and gloom scenario every day. So it's kind of heartening to hear someone from a different perspective have something like that to say.
Well, it's excuse me, sorry, I'm fighting a cold, guys, so if I cough or cut out every now and then, forgive me.
No worries.
I mean, I'll definitely never say that I like the guy Trump, to clarify.
Mm-hmm.
I mean I can't say that'll never change, but right now I can't say that I like the guy or that I like a lot of his policies, but I mean, can't say that everything has always been just horseshoes and hand grenades with him. So
that's true.
Well, I would then, if there's something I can at least add to now, because we have this liaison office. What would be a good estimate until, let's say, like there is an embassy satellite or actual an embassy, and between both countries?
Yeah,
because I know I don't know how long that will take, and if the chances, or let's say that I'll bring it up to my two co-hosts and to our guest. Would, let's say, in 2 years, is it? Yeah, about 2 years, when let's say there's an election, and let's say if Trump is not reelected, would that foster or hinder the chances of, let's say, a further peaceable diplomatic relations between North and South Korea? I don't know. I mean, that's a.
As the liberal, I guess to make my opinion, I honestly don't think we can know for sure about that, because one, progress has been made, and now there's a lot more conversation happening between North and South than there has been for a very long time, and so there's a good chance that anything that happens in this country from now on is not going to have as much of an effect on the dialogue going on between North and South Korea in the future, because they've basically the communications established. They've agreed upon certain terms. I mean, some of their terms definitely depend on some of our cooperation and some activity on our end, as the United States. But in general, I think it doesn't really. It's who gets elected, president next isn't going to have as much of an impact in the next couple of years, because I think that just the ground is already kind of, the ball's gone rolling basically, and so at least that's my hope, is that whether Trump gets reelected or whether someone else gets reelected who's just the same or completely different, whatever, I think that the dialogue has begun and progress has been started, and that it should just hopefully snowball in the right direction from here.
I actually completely agree. I think that especially the things that Trump is doing is opening up dialogue between the North and South, sort of independently of the United States. The United States isn't running this border installation. It's just the two countries working together. So hopefully, the United States can start taking less and less of a role in these negotiations as it goes on.
Well, at least at least how I see it, I think we'll have a less and less part of the negotiation when we're no longer stationing as many troops on the DMZ.
Oh, of course, and I hope that happens.
You know, because technically I believe we're still technically at war because we haven't signed the official peace treaty with North Korea.
Yeah, we are still at war with North. North.
I'll only say that is because, let's say, if we are going to, let's say, give Trump some or a significant amount of credit, minor or major amount of credit for opening up negotiations and kind of facilitating the environment for negotiations. To me, it's the North Korea and the South Korean, let's say, conversation more is also kind of, let's say, that is a proxy between other nations simultaneously, right? So it's our relationship with North Korea and South Korea's relationship with North Korea really stems with our relationship with China and our national relationship with Russia, right? So other countries that North Korea relies upon, in a sense. And so I only brought up the question if, let's say, presidencies change over, and let's say the relations between China and the relations between like Russia are compromised, that may bolster North Korea to backtrack on the significant grounds, the gains that we've made that have been made in the last couple of years. So I don't know. It's something that's not. I wouldn't say it's not feasible. It's hard to determine, but I think it's something that we should really be thinking about in at least the next couple of years going forward, in a sense. I don't know. As something to counter something, is that a different kind of observation, because I personally would like to see, or I would see personally like to see, but if this doesn't come up in the next set of primaries nor in the next set rounds during the elections, then I think that there is a possibility for the relations between North and South Korea and the ending of this conflict, in a sense, as cold as it's been, to kind of fracture and falter. Maybe I'm more of a pessimist, but I think the relations do depend upon the state and our political state and our international relations with countries that North Korea is very entangled with.
Yeah, China, obviously, like you were saying, is definitely a big issue when it comes to the negotiations, and our relations with China have been a bit frosty recently, so that's led to a little bit of a chilling in the negotiations with us and the North Koreans, but
yeah,
we'll work through it.
So I don't know how are those going. I don't know, and let's say in our guests and your eyes, Ryan, because you brought that up, at least when it comes to frosty negotiations.
I don't know any specifics. I've just been hearing chatter that it's not going terribly well, and it's always ups and downs with China and how they feel about the United States. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens. My guess is it's just a momentary, blip.
How about you, Will? What do you how do you perceive the U.S.-Chinese relations?
Well, I mean, they've always been rocky. They're definitely rocky. It's at least in the news more right now about because this trade war between them. Like I haven't been keeping too much up to date in the past couple of weeks on it. So I do know that it's the trade war that we're having. And the political issues we're having between China right now are also kind of creating a bit of a ripple effect between our relations with the EU and also Canada and Mexico right now. And so because we're in the process of renegotiating the NAFTA agreement with Mexico and Canada, Meanwhile, this Chinese, excuse me, blanking on words right now. The tariffs are on certain products are transferring a lot of the imports into China from America to Canada, and that's something that Canada can actually now use against us in negotiations. And if we try to renegotiate NAFTA, because they are now becoming, like in certain products that America was the primary exporter or to China, Canada's taking over a lot of stuff. Like I know, like in the Northeast, lobster. Maine's known for its lobster, and the lobster exports have kind of dried up because China was like the number one foreign purchaser of Maine lobster, and because of these tariffs, they've stopped buying it from Maine, and they've just gone just a few miles north of the border to Canada.
The other thing I've heard about the lobsters specifically is that the industry had a shortage of workers to actually go and I don't know, sort the lobsters or some part of the process with the lobsters. They didn't have enough labor. Do you think that might have played part of a role in why we're seeing fewer exports for that region as well?
I mean, that could be. I hadn't heard that specifically. I mean, that could be a factor in some cases, but I do know that like there are some specific businesses that they're like they were doing 10 times as much sales this time last year.
Yeah.
And they weren't complaining about shortages. They were or labor shortages. They were complaining that the purchasing wasn't there.
Interesting.
But I mean, that could be there. That could be a factor, or like some of the businesses can't keep up with, couldn't keep up with demand. Could have some of a factor. But I think that a definite contributing factor is the fact that the tariffs have caused the prices to be less competitive.
For sure, that'll always be a factor if that's the case. Yeah, there's a lot of short-term effects that are very negative with the way that Trump is negotiating these tariffs. But what do you think about how they've worked with Mexico, and do you think that they're at all effective on a global scale in making better deals for the United States?
Well, I honestly haven't seen like all the details about what's happened with Mexico. I know that a new deal was signed with Mexico, or at least they're in the process of it. They were having discussions. There's a lot of good talk going about it. I haven't seen the specific stuff, so I don't know exactly what to say, good or bad, at least from my opinions on that specific agreement. But I mean, a good agreement's a good agreement, no matter who makes it. And so there's potential for a long-term thing. Some of the stuff with Mexico is, I think one of the concerns I read is that the agreements that they made with Mexico or with the current standing president, and they're but they haven't but there are a new president's coming on soon, and he has to agree to it too or something like that. But I might be mixing stories up.
I believe that you are correct, actually.
And so it's like it could be good, but it has to it could be a good story, but it still has to go through all the steps of the process. And again, we have to like even those agreements, if this new agreement with Mexico seems good on paper, we again, just like you said, in the long term, we have to see how it's going to play out to see whether it ultimately is a benefit or if it ends up being worse off. And yes, you made the point that short term, it's like we're maybe being in some short term pain for long term benefit here, but sometimes even the long term benefit might not outweigh the short term pain because a lot of businesses don't act that far out in advance. They need to make their money now. They need to make their numbers look good, or they need to make turn the numbers around so that they can keep the business open. And even if in the long run, it seems like it might be a better idea, in the short term we're still like the Harley Davidson thing, where they because of these tariffs, they went ahead and they're shut down their factory, and they're moving moving the factories overseas because the current short-term costs of these tariffs are hurting them too much. And I don't think that they're the only business that are having to make those same decisions right now.
Now, is it just the current short-term costs, or is it a projection that the short-term costs will continue? Right. So the short-term costs that they're, let's say, enduring now because of the tariffs, is it because they're projecting? In your mind, do you think that they're projecting those costs to justify exporting, their labor, or exporting their manufacturing out?
Well, I know that the tariffs are not like the only thing that caused it to happen, but the tariffs were like the final straw, because it's like they were already like sales and costs, in that regions, like they needed to make a decision, but they were doing just fine without moving the plant there, and they were debating about moving out there, but then these tariffs started and they're like, well, we need to do it. And yeah, there is definitely some projecting, but the projecting is what businesses have to do, because you don't know how long or short these tariffs are going to be. You don't know when this is going to end, and so you have to act on what the numbers are right now and predict based on that, based on the current numbers and previous numbers. You can't predict the future entirely, but you have to, you can't, if there's no guarantee that, well, this is going to end next week or next year, then you have to make business decisions accordingly. I don't necessarily agree with them, and they could be overreacting. Like I know of other businesses that have done similar things in California or Nevada and stuff, where just in the United States in general, business have made long-term decisions based on a short-term vein. It was just things were working out so good right now, and they made a big decision to go ahead and move around or change a lot of things. And so whether or not they're overreacting to the current tariffs, I can't say. They are definitely projecting, to answer your question specifically, but it's not a bad thing to project, because there's no for sure guaranteed end to these tariffs for them. So
I think some of them actually do have time limits on them, but I could be wrong about that.
So I kind of want to circle back, because this is something that's more or less, at least because we kind of touched upon NAFTA and its renegotiations between between Canada and us between Mexico. Now, this is something that has overshadowed I would say, the majority of our lives, at least when it comes economic-wise, right? When it comes to how we individuals do business, how we as citizens do business in this country, how we are really, let's say, on an economic relations through just our two neighbors, and really throughout the world, because there's something you touched on when Canada becomes the main importer and exporter between China, right? But this is something that and then China funneling its goods from Canada and or through Mexico, through our borders with no tariffs. They just pay minimal tariffs, let's say in Mexico, or minimal tariff, whatever is competitive for them, in a sense. But to kind of take a step back, how do we all feel on NAFTA to begin with? Because I personally despise NAFTA as an act, as an economic as an economic treaty or treaties between Canada and Mexico that kind of disadvantages us as a country, and personally I think it disadvantages Mexico, if you really want to look at it. But I don't know, I despise NAFTA, so I was wondering, just give or take how you feel about it, Will, and how do my other co-hosts feel about it.
I mean, personally, I didn't dislike it. Definitely didn't hate it. I think that every agreement, that we have had or currently have or will have isn't perfect, but that doesn't make it terrible. And coming up with agreements like those, take a lot of planning, take a lot of effort, a lot of work, and a lot of cooperation between countries. And so it's not easy to, just come up with, with a agreement between three countries that everybody agrees on, that everybody says, yeah, this is great. I don't think it was hurting us anywhere near as bad as some of the rhetoric has claimed. I mean, I could be completely wrong on all that, but
yeah,
I don't think it was, I don't think it was detrimental to any of the countries. I definitely think it could, renegotiating it, so that, isn't a bad thing. But I personally didn't think it was a terrible thing that just needed to be thrown out.
No, I personally think it needs to be thrown out, but I want to get the other takes, like you, Kevin, and Ryan. I don't know how you guys feel about NAFTA.
Personally, I don't know enough about it to have a strong opinion, so I'll skip over to Ryan.
Okay.
So my biggest issue is that it's a multinational agreement. A lot of these multinational agreements have some things baked into them that I think if normal Americans actually understood what it was, they'd have a problem with it. So every single multinational agreement that we go into with another country, with other countries, multiple countries, gives away a significant amount of sovereignty that the United States currently has. So all of these different agreements have their own what they would claim are mechanisms for the settlement of investment disputes, but essentially what it turns into is a court. There's a court system that gets set up for each one of these giant multinational agreements, and it's something where a United States citizen, in a lot of these cases, can't even bring suits against people in these other countries over trade and that sort of thing, because you're not allowed to unless you're a multinational corporation, that sort of thing. So whenever we get into these agreements, we're actually allowing these other countries to potentially, wrong our citizens, and they don't have nearly as much of a recourse as they did before. So that's my big problem with all of these multinational agreements. Specifically with NAFTA, I'm not entirely sure. Are the percentages set properly, and is there actually free trade? I know that under the current NAFTA system, Canada's allowed to tax our milk at like 300%. There's dairy products that are taxed at anywhere from 100 to 300% going into Canada. So it doesn't seem like a very free trade area to me.
Well, I don't know. Well, again, if we want to go to let's say an unequal, maybe then let's kind of expand it then off your point, Ryan, when it comes to like the unequal trade agreements that, let's say, the United States takes on with primarily its allies, or what we consider our allies, right? We take an economic hit when it comes to trade, so we're liable to be submitted to tariff or taxes or tariffs or taxes. Well, let's just say tariffs between our nations. But then let's say in return we provide something that is beneficial to us. So in a sense, when it comes to like Europe, because that's another, that's a highly contested economic dispute, right? Especially between Germany, at least in the last couple of months, is that we provide security.
Dispute? I'm not sure when you say Europe, an economic dispute. I'm not sure what you're saying, between the United States or between countries
the trade agreements
inside
between
of
the
Europe.
EU. So with the EU, or let's say specifically, let's say Germany, because as Trump has at least under this president, has threatened tariffs upon China, right, to get a better deal with the Chinese. We've also done the same thing to Germany when it comes to aluminum, when it comes to steel, when it comes to other products. It's also cars. I don't know if you heard about that that we were going to put a significant, a large tariff upon German-made cars, right? Which is a significant part of their industry, and also other areas of their economy as well. In a way, it's kind of a theme I see when it comes to this presidency is that he's more or less attacking, and he's trying to level out to make more equitable, at least in his in this administration eyes, trying to make trade relations more equitable in favor of the United States. And because the theme before was that we took an economic hit, or we gave up a lot to when it comes to trade, or we took a disadvantageous position when it comes to trade for other goals, if you understand what I mean. So let's say we're not going to put tariffs on German goods, as high as we should, right, to make American products competitive here in the United States. But then let's say on the back end, we have a couple of major military bases in Germany, or in Poland, or somewhere in the or somewhere in Europe, has been, let's say, throughout the entirety of the Cold War. I see that when it comes to the renegotiation with NAFTA. I also see that with the renegotiation with trade agreements in Europe and even with China. But that's more specifically focused on Europe. I don't know how you guys kind of feel about this trade-off, right? Because I'm kind of conflicted in a sense, right? Because I don't know. I favor the United States when it comes to our military apparatuses, or the tools that our military uses for, let's say, global security, or let's say our projection of military and political power. Right? I like to have as many tools at our disposal as we possibly can have. While at the same time, I do not favor us being in a disadvantageous economic position when it comes to trade.
Yeah,
so I don't know.
I guess for me, I don't think the military does a good job of adequately assessing how much damage our presence in a region does if we're there militarily and have bases there with the local populace. And I think that a lot of our problems, wars and things that we've gotten into in the last couple decades, can be traced back to our expansionary military policies. And from a certain perspective, just because it makes us tactically more prepared doesn't mean that we're going to be safer. It means that when we get attacked, because we're there, we can respond better.
Yeah.
But the problem is, in a lot of cases, it leads to a when, not an if.
Yeah, I concur with that. I've actually I was in Jordan a few years ago. My sister was there doing archaeological digs, and I actually met a bunch of people. And one of the guys that I got to meet there was a Saudi, and he was saying before he met my sister and her friends on this dig project that they were on, he hated Americans because their presence in the Middle East, it's like that was just kind of a thing that, like, among people in the Middle East, is like, if they're getting involved in stuff that wasn't their business, even if, like, ultimately things some things that we've done weren't necessarily bad, like Saddam Hussein, taking down Saddam Hussein, stuff like that. It's like the fact that we got involved when it wasn't in their business is a great insult, and like it just that got a lot of people angry. And then there's of course the much more direct impact of our military involvement there, of that the accidental deaths, civilian casualties, stuff like that, do breed a lot of animosity against against America. And it's like, I mean, ISIS came out of it's like we took care of one group and one terrorist militant group, and then out pops another one, and and a lot of those people were joined up because they were affected by our military presence directly. Their friends, their families were killed by American bombs and American bullets, and so they wanted revenge.
Well, and to kind of add on to that, what caused the USS Cole bombing? What caused people to want to take down the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and the White House? Why did those they're horribly evil terrorists, obviously, But what caused them to get onto those planes and commit those atrocities? And my guess is at least part of it is literally just because we were in the region. And if it boils down to us protecting Israel, then okay, I understand that, and I want to continue defending Israel because they're an important ally. But I think it's more than just Israel. It's the other incursions into their land and territory that we've made with military bases. Definitely since the 80s, but probably since before then. And I don't think that we've had actual discussions about that. How many of us can say that we've talked about the reasons why we got attacked on 9/11?
Well, I mean, it would probably stem at least because now I'm just going off of what my dad has told me, because my dad worked, or at least my dad was one of the first American soldiers in Saudi Arabia in '91 when it came to Desert Shield, right?
Saudi Arabia? They were never in Saudi Arabia. They were in Kuwait, and then they invaded Iraq.
Well, no. Desert Shield was in Saudi Arabia. So my dad landed in Saudi Arabia, and the majority of our forces were stationed in Saudi Arabia. So you can even look at maps, look at everything else. We were stationed. So for the first 6 months of that conflict, the multinational, the international coalition to take down Saddam Hussein stationed itself in Saudi Arabia. So they were there for the first 6 months in '91, and then, or 1990 to 1991, and then in '91, Saudi Arabia was used as an anchor and a stepping stone to go into Kuwait to liberate Kuwait, and then go into Iraq. That was primarily, that was, I would say, a catalyst for everything that would come afterwards. Before then, you don't see as much, I would say, hostility or resentment to the United States in the Middle East. But there are plenty, there are very good examples, like Iran, right? It's probably the biggest example throughout the 70s and the 80s when it comes to resentment for the United States. But when it came to like Afghanistan, where many of, let's say, the 9/11 terrorists either were part of the logistics or were, I would say, have root in ideologically or even physically, come from the Soviet Afghan war in the 80s, right? So when you come to Osama bin Laden, when he was disowned from his family, he went to Afghanistan, and he fought against the Russians. But you don't really hear much of him complaining about the United States and the aid and the weapons and the training and the money that were given to the Mujahideen and other, let's say, unconventional forces and units and groups that would actually go into Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. You find all that resentment after '91 when it comes to the Americans landing in Saudi Arabia and other Western powers, landing in Saudi Arabia. Because then when you go up through the 90s, right, you have the '93 World Trade Center bombings. People forget about it, where you had a massive, I think, van or a car bomb that was detonated in the underground parking garage. You also have the two embassy bombings in Afghanistan or in Africa. I forgot which countries, but on a side note, I actually have a distant relative who actually was asked by the State Department to design those embassies, and he refused to design them, just for the fact that they weren't 100 meters away from the road. Or at least one of them wasn't.
Yeah.
But that's a side note.
I wouldn't put my name on that either. I wouldn't put my name on that either.
On that either. But we had the two embassy bombings in Africa, and then you have the Cole bombing in 2000. But more or less, it's this idea of intrusion by the West into the Middle East. And that's exactly my point. Did we ever think about or discuss as a nation, is this something that we want to be doing? Do we want to elect leaders that take us into these situations
you know, that cause these problems. A lot of times in the discussions that we get into with people, we don't talk about the U.S. role that's played, you know, preceding it. Just like with the United States-Russia conflict over the country of Georgia. You know, does anybody ever talk about why Russia invaded Georgia? Do you know, Mikey?
If I remember correctly, there were major oil and gas hubs that were built.
So obviously that's what benefits them, but what was the actual reason why they stated they were doing it? Because you don't just haul off and do stuff like that on an international stage without having a reason.
The reason, I would say, okay, I can't remember the actual stated reason that the Russians invaded Georgia in 2008. But
it's because the United States was making, was through Georgia and our funding of their Air Force was having them making illegal incursions into Russian airspace to spy on them.
Okay.
We were directing Georgia to fly their planes into Russian space. And that's what they used as their legitimate reason for invasion. And to a certain extent, I don't blame them.
The only result that I know is, at least in Georgia, or at least in the areas that they occupied in Georgia, which I think they still do.
Yeah, I believe they still do as well.
They still do have major oil and gas line hubs that were built back in the Soviet era.
Oh, I'm sure that there is a major benefit to them. They're not just going to haul off and do it for no reason.
Yeah, for no reason. But
we have to look
I only know the result. But if that was the stated reason, then I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I forgot what it's called, and maybe Will or maybe you guys can actually come up with the top of my head. But there's actually I wouldn't say a theory, but it's an observation that the United States, let's say in the last almost 20 years, when it comes to the rules of, let's say, of warfare or the reasons why you go to war. So like, so think of drones. So how we're using drones, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only country in the world that use drones the way that we have for the majority of the time that they have been, let's say, effective on the battlefield has been the United States.
Yeah.
And so we more or less set the example on how we use this technology. But now we see other countries using that same technology in a way similarly that we're using it, but counter to our interests.
Yeah, and we get upset.
So, and we get upset. But we wrote the rules on it.
Yep.
It's the same thing when it comes to let's say foreign policy.
We're the ones that decided to bomb an area, wait for the rescue teams to come in, and then bomb it again with the drone. Yeah, we set that precedent.
But to set precedent, but we're also setting precedent, you know, as foreign policy, as we are the global security power of the world still. And maybe that's a rule that we can discuss, you know, maybe a little bit after. But we set precedent, right? Oh, you can't do this, or you can't do this. These are legitimate reasons to do something, right? So like the Russians getting involved in Syria. Why? Because they're going to war against global terrorism. But who made that result? You know, who made that precedent? Oh, we did.
Yep.
Right? Oh, no, you can't go to Syria. Why? We're fighting terrorism.
Well,
do you not like us fighting terrorism?
Well, and they legitimize a lot of their Chechenian atrocities based on terrorism.
I don't know. Maybe the Chechens deserved it.
Well, no, they're terrorists, and so when they crack down on them and come in and kill a bunch of people, that's because they claim they're all terrorists in a very similar way to us.
Right. So, but like I said, that there's precedent, and maybe that's something that we haven't really thought. Maybe in this overall discussion that we haven't talked about is the United States setting precedent and doctrine.
We're going to need a drone treaty at some point. There's no way that you can get around, not regulating the use of drones in warfare.
Yeah, especially once, countries that are not our allies start using them as heavily as we have.
Exactly. And the different uses of drones, it range from the almost microscopic all the way to the airplane sized. So, we're going to have treaties that dictate what you can do with micro drones that can infiltrate embassies and spy on people. The swarm, those little drones can swarm together and converge all on a target, kill somebody, and then fly away. There are so many nightmare scenarios with drones and the capabilities they're going to have in the very near future. We have to. Yeah.
And I was just reading an article on why does the U.S. love armed robots so much, or something like that. It was talking kind of the same, about that same thing. It was, and not just drones, but like the flying drones, but also like the robots that their original purpose were for bomb defusing.
Mm-hmm.
They had all these attachments and everything, remote control, everything to go into places to defuse bombs. So that you didn't have to send a person in there. And with all those attachments and everything like that, they started putting machine guns on them and grenade launchers.
Well, I would also imagine you can actually use it to plant a bomb as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, or just to be the bomb.
Yeah. Well, I would bet you don't want to destroy it. It's probably a pretty valuable piece of technology, but it's better to risk that than a human being, planting it in the first place.
Well, they did this. Well, that's what they did in Dallas. If you don't remember the Dallas shooting.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, they
a year or two ago,
the robot to blow off a door, right?
Either drove or flew a drone up, and it detonated and killed the suspect.
Yeah.
Right, but that's law enforcement. That isn't. That isn't military.
Well, yeah, but the
law
rules
enforcement
against
is usually just one step behind military.
Well, and they usually have much stricter rules that they have to follow.
Because they're dealing with American civilians,
Yeah.
not foreign civilians or foreign engagers.
The Constitution applies to us, or at least it should.
Yeah. And then there's even ISIS and other terrorist groups in the Middle East have been using little $100 drones, that you could buy off Amazon, and rigging just an extra little attachment to it, basically just a tube with a little solenoid to it, and they would fly around, basically follow around security personnel or military convoys, just fly over it, and then that tube had a little grenade in it.
Oh,
and so you just put a grenade in there and then pop the solenoid, and then let gravity take the work, and it would just drop bombs on these groups.
That's crazy.
And so there's a video I saw of it was a documentary on Netflix about some Syrian rescue workers in that were dealing, basically going in to all the bombed cities and trying to rescue people and provide medical aid and get people out of the rubble from all the bombings and everything. And one of the, every now and then they'd have security guys around them, and they would be shooting up in the air because they were being followed by drones. They zoom in on this little hobby kit quadcopter that just flying above them, and they'd be trying to shoot it down because it was following them, and they were afraid it was going to drop a grenade on them.
Jeez, that's horrifying. Well, I think there's a number of reasons why we need to build drone nets, a net cannon, take those things down.
Actually, they have those, right? They have. Primitively, they have net cannons.
Well, I want my civilian version, so I can take them down when they're flying over my airspace.
Yeah, well, they have, like I said, they have net cannons. There are other electric, countermeasure devices that more or less
disrupting the radio frequencies, and then
well, that would
some
be illegal.
Airports have
even
it? Taken to trained falcons and eagles to keep drones out of the to catch drones out of the sky if they're flying too close to an airport.
They'll do it with a drone, but they can't teach them to get the flock of geese to fly away.
No, they do that.
Well, they use them for that too. Falcons and eagles are used pretty extensively to keep birds away from airports, but not always effectively.
Yeah, well, definitely not always.
No, but it kind of shows when we talk about drones, right? It's the tactical advantage, right? It's a weapon system that is tactically advantageous and is still in development. And maybe this is the one thing that I can come off of this is with the United States, as we have been militarily dominant, superior to any and all other nations on this planet. There kind of comes with a hubris with that, right? And this is pretty much every major empire, right? There's a hubris to it.
Well, it's the David and Goliath story played out at a nation state level.
I wouldn't say David and Goliath.
Well, it's what usually happens if you're talking about historic empires that have fallen. They always fall to some smaller group that wasn't quite, nearly as powerful as them.
Well, I would say not nearly as well. Let's say perceivably as not being as powerful.
I think the main thing is underestimatedly as powerful.
Well, there we go.
Exactly. Well, and that's where the David and Goliath story kind of comes in.
So I say the perception, but I think right now the United States, right, we've been living off of a hubris since the end of the Cold War, right? Because we defeated the evil empire of communism, supposedly. I only say supposedly because it always come back. But since the end of the Cold War, right, and we being the singular security power in the world, and the only power that can project power anywhere in the world within 36 hours, 24 hours, right? No other nation has that developed as we do, and there is a hubris, and the hubris is that we can create doctrine with new technology that we develop before anyone else. And then when evidently other nations catch up, right? Other nations that we consider to be backwaters can catch up. So again, I don't even think
they catch up. Nobody's caught up to the United States. The problem is that we hogtie ourselves and keep ourselves from actually being able to wage war against these countries. You look at Vietnam and our bombing runs were only allowed to go through certain corridors and all these different limitations that we put on ourselves.
That was a restriction. That was an artificial restriction because we didn't want the Russians and or the Chinese being involved.
Well, and that's the thing. Either you want to win the war or you're gonna kowtow to those other countries. So.
No, I mean I agree with you, but that's not what I'm wanting to talk about, right? Because I more or less want to talk about the development of new technologies, right?
Well, that was kind of a development of new technologies. We could have bombed them significantly more effectively than we did in World War II or even the Korean War because we had modern technology and new missiles and all that sort of stuff. And the limitations that we put on were because we didn't want to actually go to actual war with them. We wanted to call it a police action and all these other different terms and
I think what you're going. I'm not gonna say I disagree with you, but I'm saying that I think you're going off on a different route on this tree. What I'm trying to profess is that the United States develops technology, develops. I think we said this earlier, but more or less develops not contingencies, but contexts in which these technologies and these technologies be used because we're the only one that uses them, right? So like drones, right? This is the biggest example, right? For the longest time, we were the only nation that had drones, and then we used drones because we're the only ones that use drones to use them willy-nilly. Or when it comes to our doctrine on global terrorism, we're the only, as we stated earlier, right? We're the only ones that use them willy-nilly because we're the only ones that were engaging on them. But then we have other nations that say counter to our interests, now using those same doctrines that we developed in the same mannerisms and the same excuses that we developed. Right? That's where I'm talking about hubris. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about let's say putting ourselves at a tactical disadvantageous position because of other perceived threats into that combat area, which you are. And I think on that, if we go down that line, that route, right, we put ourselves in that disadvantageous position because we were afraid that the Chinese and the Russians would get involved, sparking another war, which then never happened, right? Mm-hmm. And that's playing over today, right? But that's playing over today in a different position. Because and this is my personal belief, is that it is disadvantageous for those who are in political power to put ourselves into a conventional war in the scale that is necessary. But that's just me. And so that's where I agree with you, Ryan.
Okay, that's fair.
I'm gonna say that like I agree with what Mikey's saying, but I think that like ultimately any agreement or any kind of doctrine we set on the appropriate use of military technology is going to create a tactical disadvantage, because you're creating limitations on ways that you can utilize military technology, which I don't see as inherently a bad thing. I mean, yes, it is a tactical disadvantage, but from a, basically a community morality perspective, go back to the Geneva Convention. Things from the Geneva Convention, and that has happened even since World War II. These agreements on, it's like we don't carpet bomb anymore. Carpet bombing is not a tactically disadvantageous strategy, but it's not a desirable strategy to just bomb the shit out of an entire countryside. And the same thing is like use of flamethrowers. Flamethrowers are on the battlefield a very terrifying and effective. They're not necessarily the most effective, but they are very effective and at killing and scaring people. But we don't use them because of military treaties. Terrorists don't follow those treaties. Terrorists don't follow those agreements. But that doesn't, and so that puts us at a bit of a tactical disadvantage. If a terrorist decides to use a flamethrower on U.S. troops, we're not going to turn around and use a flamethrower back on them.
Well, that's not because we couldn't. So I believe that generally the treaties that we sign allow for us to use other means against people that aren't signatories to that treaty. It's just it doesn't look good.
Well, that's the thing is we don't, and even in the United States, so I have several friends who are returned combat veterans, and there's rules of engagement. We still have rules of engagement, where you're not allowed to shoot at somebody unless there's unless they fire at you first, things like that, those kind of and there's all these. Yes, we're not in a agreement with ISIS or Al Qaeda or any of those guys, but we still follow the same protocols because we're trying to set a precedent. Just like John McCain was pretty big on, stood real firm about we do not torture. For that same reason, it's like we as a country need to set a moral standard for ourselves. How we conduct ourselves militarily, and in some cases that does put us at a tactical disadvantage, but in the big picture, I think it's worth it, because as we've seen in cases of in Vietnam and Korea and stuff, when when people hear about the things that are, when people really start to see the atrocities of war, and if they hear about stuff that our troops might be doing, they're not happy about it. Then they become really against the military and that conflict. Yeah. And so the more humanely, which is, I don't know, when talking about war, it's a little bit ironic, but the more appropriately we can conduct ourselves, even if it does limit our use of certain technologies against certain opponents, in the big picture, I think is worth it.
I would generally agree with you, but I think there's some instances where we should do away with potentially some of the things that we've decided to take into account. I don't have any specifics, but
there's a few that come to the top of my mind. In the rules of engagement, you cannot engage, let's say, a potential combatant until that potential combatant more or less engages you first. Right, that's something that we all really know about. But I know of stories about those who are bunkered down in forward operating posts, where there are men on ridges and on hills out in the distance with binoculars and radios, and they're calling in mortar fire. But technically, they can't engage those men because those individuals are not armed. and they're not directly shooting or directly engaging you as a soldier, right? Now, if those conventions were up, that person would more or less be killed, and there wouldn't be accurate mortar fire upon the positions in which these men, which these soldiers have, are let's say bunkered in or entrenched in, or are occupying. But because of that situation where they cannot fire upon them because they do not have arms, now they have accurate mortar fire on them, right? So that's a limitation in a sense, right? Because that's a rule of engagement enforced strictly. Yeah. What's another one that comes to the top of my mind? I know this was years and years ago, but when I believe it was our Marines when they were first issued ACOG scopes. So I think they're 3 or 4 powered ACOG scopes that they were very accurate with them, and so they're just knocking off. What was it? They're engaging terrorists, or let's say combatants, at a further range, and they were so precise with them that there were humanitarian groups that wanted them to cease that because they more or less considered that execution, right? Not let's say not just that they were at a disadvantage because we had better technology. Because of that, it wasn't that we were just engaging combatants; we were executing combatants because we were more tactically advantageous with this ACOG scope. So, I mean, maybe there are gray lines in which we have to navigate upon this, but I kind of drift further away from those gray lines, and I want to put, let's say, our military at the best our military at the greatest advantage that we possibly can.
And I would pretty much agree with you once we're in combat. Once we've decided to go to war, I would generally agree with you.
And maybe that is the great decision, or the great maybe this is where all these kind of, and as I explained further, that we had different routes in which we were talking about the subject. Mm-hmm. And maybe the great tree that we actually maybe have missed, or I think that actually is going to spurt out of the ground, is the idea that we haven't really declared war since the Second World War.
Sort of. I mean, the president has to get authorization from Congress. So if they technically didn't call it a war, I mean,
it still gets authorization from Congress, but it's not a declaration of war. There isn't really a vote.
No, there's a vote. There was a vote on Iraq. There's been a vote on every single military action that we've done, major military operations. I'm talking, Korea, Vietnam. Those all had votes.
Yeah, but it wasn't under the guise of war, as it's constitutional. Right?
I don't know.
Right, because an official declaration of war has not been signed. Has not been voted on by Congress, nor signed by the president, or asked of by the president, since the Second World War. And I think this is where I think much of this conversation is going to diverge. Has converged into. Personally, is because that we have personally, how I observe it, is that we have that we are a nation that fights conflicts, but we don't call it war. So there's no wartime economy. There is the military-industrial complex, as people have put it, but the entire nation itself is not converted into a wartime economy.
Well, yeah, but I mean, we haven't gone up against an enemy that would put us in those kind of scenarios. The reason we had to go to a wartime economy during World War II is because the Germans were a big enough foe that unless we put literally every amount of effort, time, money, material, whatever we could into it, we were going to lose.
Well, is the global war on terrorism really anything different?
Yeah,
that was also at a time before we had really fully established the military prowess that we currently have.
Yeah.
You know, that was the start of that. So it's like, in order to, like, now we don't need to go into a wartime economy because our military and our military budget is substantial enough that we can handle just about any foreseeable conflict. I mean, outside of a full-on nuclear war, or that, you know,
or any kind of war directly with Russia or China would require us to go into a wartime economy,
or every major power. But
the war on terror,
because we were in the Cold War for how long, you know, without going into wartime economy. I mean, granted, that was a Cold War. It was you know, not an actual.
Well, the beautiful thing about the Cold War was actually massively good for our economy. You want to look at every single major technological advance in the 20th century. It came from the Cold War.
I'm not saying that, but it wasn't a wartime economy. It wasn't like World War II, where we had to drop everything. Like, we had to stop. You know, basically, no one could collect metal because all metal recycling had to go to the military. All, you know, it was like Ford Model T was given a wood bumper until after the war, or you could then turn it back in for your metal bumper because they had to, you know, they had restrictions on what you could use. You know, you had to, on the eastern seaboard, you know, you had to cut off your lights at, you know, if you were within a certain distance from the shoreline, so that the U-boats couldn't try and target, you know, the U.S. coastal cities.
Yeah, well, and another thing that's happened since World War II is containerization. So the way that we physically ship material across the globe has radically changed since World War II. And it's pretty much right after World War II when it's invented. So under the old system called break bulk, we could transport about, I think it was like 13,000 tons on some of the larger ships. Since the, you know, maybe the numbers might be massively inflated from that, but essentially now we can do about 80. And so with that capability, we're not going to have metal shortages the way we did during World War II, because we've been moving around resources and stockpiles and that sort of thing in preparation. And the other thing that's changed is we have a standing army. You know, before World War II,
we have a standing army, and we have equipment, plenty of equipment on standby.
Yeah, so we've
overseas and domestic. You know, we have this, you know, these armories just loaded to the teeth, waiting just in case. So that's the kind of thing. But we didn't have that before World War II.
Oh no, of course, it's. I'm not disagreeing with any of those points that you guys have brought up, but I wasn't really trying to focus on the actual economy. I was more or less focusing on the actual environment, right? We as the populace.
But that leads into it.
My question I posed to you: do you feel that you're at war?
No.
Does anybody here feel that they're at war on a day-to-day basis?
No, but
no. That's the thing.
I'd say the war on terror is probably closer to the war on drugs as an actual war. You can't really declare war on terrorism, and you couldn't go into an all-out fight against it. So the only reason we'd feel it as an average American is if we knew someone that got drafted to go over there, and the numbers just don't warrant that. You know, it doesn't take us having a draft to get enough people to go take over Afghanistan. Vicious cycle,
right? It's like like you said, it's the war on drugs. It's ever perpetual. It's the war on terror. It's ever perpetual.
No, and I think that we definitely need to, as citizens,
we as a nation, that we spend an exorbitant amount, we lose the lives of good men and women an exorbitant amount, right? Maybe not exorbitant, but a significant amount. And we, as that, right? And and for me, when we engage in a military conflict, it has to be absolutely total. That's how I feel about it, because that's the reason why we have the declaration of war, where the president asks the Congress, who are the representatives of the people, that we are going to go to war. And then when we do go to war, we put our entire national effort into ending the conflict.
But I mean, okay, let's look at Iraq, right? Okay, that war, the war in Iraq was won in 2 weeks. Are you saying if we had put everyone on rationing for a week, we could have done it in 7 days? The logic that you're promoting doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We don't need to put everybody on rationing to go to war with Afghanistan. We don't need to do that until we're at war with Russia or at war with China. Okay, it putting everything we have doesn't mean that we do stuff that doesn't make sense, because that doesn't make sense. Well,
you know what doesn't make sense is that
should we have nuked
we have
them?
A perpetual conflict where we funnel in more and more.
I agree with that.
At a minimal level.
We should definitely
to get minimally done.
But that's a different scenario than going to war in Iraq. Okay, that comes down to what are the goals of the military once we've actually taken over the country, and I think that our goals are massively messed up, and the goal, I believe, is to keep a permanent presence there. So we've elected politicians that want that as their goal, and we just need to work to elect politicians that don't.
And maybe this is where I think we agree on, but what I'm trying to focus on is more or less the attitude of the populace, and let's say the people that represent the populace, because I think on a day-to-day basis, right, we don't feel that we're at war, so we elect the same people over and over again that perpetuate conflict, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean,
at a minimal level, to the point where we have a permanent presence and nothing changes.
But
right, really, has anything changed in Afghanistan?
No, I agree. Really. But how could you possibly, quote, make the American people feel it? That doesn't make sense. We can't artificially hurt people because it would make them want to get out of the war.
I mean, we can't now.
At what point could we have? At what point would you say that we want to artificially?
Where we actually had a discussion on the congressional floor, right, where there's actually a declaration of war when the government says that we were at war, right?
But what does that do?
We have a minority of the populace going out and fighting on behalf of a country that on the day-to-day basis is completely is absent and separated from it. That's what I'm feeling at this point. I'm feeling that we have good men and women dying overseas, for causes that are good or maybe not good, depending on where you stand, but nevertheless are dying for a majority of the population to really more or less not think about it on the day-to-day.
But I mean,
that's where I'm at.
Here's the thing. There aren't going to be more U.S. soldiers dying if it's a war as opposed to an extended military engagement. The name doesn't make a difference.
The name should make a difference.
How? I could just as easily ignore the fact that we're at war compared to an extended military engagement. It's going to cost us the exact same number of United States soldiers' lives. The only way that you could make it more of a problem for the American population is if there's more deaths, it costs more, or they are physically inconvenienced because we're using all of the tin or we're using all of the aluminum for the war effort. There's no way to do that.
Second, it's cost an exorbitant amount.
I agree, but apparently nobody.
I would actually say that the only way that we could actually feel it is with rationing, because the human cost is already significant enough that people feel it.
Not really.
We have, we have days, and we have, every city across the country has, memorial days for fallen local heroes.
Well, yeah, but
it's like the human cost is already enough for people to feel it.
Oh no, not even close.
Financial cost is already enough for people to feel it, and nobody cares because that's one of our biggest spending points, and it just keeps growing. I think the only way for people to feel it would be to actually restrict, basically, have them feel it. It's like you can't go out after a certain point. You have to have, or curfews, restrictions, rationing, things like that. That's the only way to actually make it feel. I don't think that, because I'm with Mikey on this, is that we have far too great of a emotional disconnect between between the American people and the military and the basically the combatants.
I'm not disagreeing with that, and I think that each individual American needs to do their part to realize what's going on. But if you want to look at death tolls and that sort of stuff,
oh no, they're so minimal. It's insignificant compared to any other conflict.
It was really more dangerous for an American to be in Chicago from the after we took over Iraq than it was for a United States soldier to be in Iraq.
No, I mean, when it comes to death toll, that's true, right? Comparatively any other conflict, it's insignificant. Maybe except for the first Gulf War, but that was so short.
It was short and it was insignificant. And I'm not saying that the lives of each and every single American soldier aren't significant, because they absolutely are, and I'm very appreciative for the sacrifice that they made. I don't want anyone to think that I'm callous about that. But if you want to look at the United States in Afghanistan or the United States in Iraq and compare that to the casualties in World War II or World War I or the Revolutionary, or even the Revolutionary War, which was also fairly small numbers per capita, was much larger at that point, but the numbers are just minuscule comparatively.
Yeah, but the thing is what makes a conflict like this interesting, right? So when we take about the larger conflicts, let's say World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, comparatively they're short compared to, let's say, this extended engagement, right? And so I think people are more or less, they're emotionally disconnected and they're exhausted because we're always fighting somewhere, right? Or we're fighting on the same ground, right? So this is something that my dad recalls listening to his dad, because my grandfather fought in the Second World War as my father fought in the First Gulf War. But when my dad was growing up, and he remembered watching the TV, the news, Walter Cronkite and all that with his dad, my grandfather, and how repetitive it was. We're fighting over the same ground over and over and over again, right? Similarly, but let's say not exactly the same, but similarly, as we're fighting over the same ground in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it drove my grandfather mad, because the idea was that when you take ground, you hold ground, and then you move forward, right? In the sense, what we're doing is that we're fighting over the same ground, and this is doctrine, this is tactics, but we're fighting over the same ground over and over and over again. We're fighting in the same regions over and over and over again.
Yeah,
right. So
I can see reasons why you would fight over the same ground over again, but tactically it could make sense.
But people get worn out.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Is people are emotionally disconnected.
The other side gets far
and people
more
are worn out.
But the other side gets far more worn out because they have far fewer people.
What?
The other side gets way more worn down from that tactic. It's probably a very good military tactic.
I mean, the results haven't been the greatest. Not for the opposing, not for our side. We fought over the same ground in Vietnam. We ended up just leaving.
Well, I think that there were other circumstances in that war.
Because I think you're looking at this from a McNamara, more or less, perspective, right? When he was Secretary of Defense, it's numbers, right? You kill so many people, you lose so many people, and you win the war.
Well, and I think by that metric, we killed far more of their people.
And we're still fighting them.
The Vietnamese?
Well, not the Vietnamese.
I was talking about Vietnam.
We left.
No, we left because our populace got upset about the number of casualties, which again, obviously not compared to Iraq, but relatively small numbers compared to World War II.
Well, yeah, it's relatively small numbers, but how about this? Our casualties, right, that they got upset about comparatively to the Vietnamese.
Yeah,
right?
the Vietnamese had far more casualties.
Well over 1 million.
Yeah.
And our casualties were roughly about 58,000.
Yeah.
So, the numbers game, right? We lost 58,000. They lost over 1 million. Technically, we should have won the war.
No, like I said, we lost for a lot of other reasons that have nothing to do with that strategy.
And that's
what other ways in which our hands were tied.
Well, what I was explaining earlier, you said that was a viable strategy.
It could be.
Right, fighting over the same ground.
Yes,
it hasn't.
That was a viable strategy. We lost for other social reasons, mostly. We did not lose because of that specific tactic. We lost because we weren't willing to do more, and because our populace got upset with the casualties because of a campaign back in the United States, by a number of different organizations to sow dissent among the American populace. And I'm not saying it wasn't justified, but that's why we lost. We didn't lose because our military wasn't more powerful or we couldn't have overwhelmed them.
But I said,
but it wasn't
again,
that
what do you mean
tactic.
about doing more? Right? What's the one thing that they could have done more? In your vision, because I know exactly what they could have done more.
We could have bombed strategic targets more effectively if we weren't restricting ourselves artificially.
You know what also we could have done? We actually could have pushed north and taken North Vietnam. But we didn't. See, that's what I'm aiming at. Well, at least in this conversation, at least in this part of the conversation, that's what I'm aiming at. We could have invaded North Vietnam. We could have burned every village on the way up to Hanoi.
And again, that's also a separate.
But
that's an overarching strategy that we weren't going with. But you can go with the take ground, kill a bunch of people, move back a little bit, let them come back in, kill them again. You can go with that tactic and combine it with a general strategy of moving north. My guess is that there were political reasons why we weren't deciding to move north. No, there were.
We've already expressed those political reasons.
So it's not the tactic that was the problem.
All I've suggested...
I know, and I'm saying that what you're suggesting is probably incorrect.
Before this divergence was because we are fighting over the same ground over and over again. Granted, the casualties are minimal, right? But we're fighting over the same ground. We're putting more people, effective, let's say at minimal effectiveness over the same ground. People are going to get worn out.
I disagree with that. So the biggest issue with moving forward too quickly is you stretch your supply lines and wear people.
I never said that we're moving forward too quickly, but we're not moving forward at all.
No, I know. And so what I'm saying is to balance those,
to Afghanistan,
you have to balance those two strategies, Mikey.
We're fighting over the same blocks. We're fighting over the same cities over and over and over again. And the thing is people here in the United States are worn out. They are tired and they're emotionally disconnected.
No, we're not worn out or tired. No, I entirely disagree with that. To be worn out, we would have to be cognizant of the fact that we're even at war. I don't think after the first 2 weeks of Iraq, other than the increased security measures at the airport, people even really understand we're at war. I don't think we're worn out at all. I don't think we got to the point of being worn out.
Okay, if we're not worn out, then what are we, right? Because at this point, you're saying that
we basically just accepted the situation, and I think that it boils down to each one of us doing our part to highlight the excesses and to highlight the failures of this policy to the other people in our community.
Do more?
I want to cut in real quick because I agree with both of you, because I think that this is one of the things that actually has some people, has split some people, in that there are a lot of people that are worn out, that we're still at war, that we're still at this, we're still in this conflict, but there are a lot of people that are completely, just ignorant or at least non-cognizant to the fact that we are still in this conflict.
I'd say oblivious, yeah.
Yeah, oblivious is a good word. Yeah.
Even myself, I don't think about the fact that we have troops over in Iraq and Afghanistan probably 0.1% of my time. There's very minimal amounts of my brain power that's devoted to thinking about that. And I think that it's important that we have these discussions and just make people aware of the fact that a huge portion of their tax money is going and being wasted in these kinds of things.
And I think that's the point where people are the most tired, at least on from my perspective on my side of the aisle, at least, is the spending.
Yeah, well,
the continued spending and increase in spending on just war in general, and this in this conflict specifically, people are tired of spending so much money on war, especially hearing it's like this is getting into a tax financial politics aspect of the conversation, but when people start complaining, it's like, well, it's like we don't want our taxes to go up. We don't want to pay for this. We don't want to pay for that. But then it's like, well, but the military budget keeps growing.
Yeah, I've got a question for you. I'm interested to see if you've even really realized this, but I feel almost like the mainstream Democrats have kind of morphed into a hawkish party themselves. If you look at Hillary Clinton, we saw, he died, and then a maniacal cackle coming after that. She wasn't going to be anything different than Obama, and Obama wasn't anything different from Bush in that perspective. Obama started a war himself.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely agree that especially the established politicians, that is something that they have become very hawkish on it. That is like they're not focused on military spending as much as the people are. I think that the more liberal people have a much bigger issue on military spending than the liberal politicians.
Okay, so do you think that that's partially one of the reasons why Hillary Clinton had trouble winning in some of the key demographics that Democrats have held for a long time? Mainly
absolutely.
Rust Belt.
Absolutely is. I know a lot of people who I personally know a lot of people who were Green Party or even libertarian voting liberals because Hillary and they very critical of Obama, very critical of Hillary, very critical of a lot of mainstream Democratic politicians because of their stance on war, or at least their whether that was that they actually had a stance that was pro-war, or or the other side was just basically ignoring it and avoiding the topic. And a lot of people were on my side of the aisle very critical of Obama and his use of drones and his and basically the different attacks and conflicts that he was getting us involved in and spending money and costing lives. And it's definitely one of the things that caused Hillary to not resonate with voters, is that there are a lot more, it's one of those things, like Democrats don't have a single rallying cry like conservatives do. Conservatives actually have two big ones.
Yeah.
And I've made this comment, is like abortion and the Second Amendment. Basically, if you can say you're against abortion, you have a Republican vote. If you say that you are pro Second Amendment, you have a Republican vote. If you say you're pro socialized Medicare or socialized healthcare, but pro drone strikes, you don't. Then you don't have a liberal vote. Guaranteed.
Well, and the difference is the Republican will probably still show up and vote. The Democrat just doesn't show up historically. And
yeah, historically until the past year and a half.
Yeah,
that was one thing. But I mean, and that was a similar thing 8-10 years ago. The winning party becomes complacent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's just a thing with politics. Is Obama won, and then we win, but Obama won because people got fired up because people hated Bush and did not want another Bush, and and so they came, liberals came and voted for Obama. He came in, and then when he came back, they voted him back in, and then they're like, yeah, we're good. Yeah. And they're like, we got this, and then Trump came along, and now they're like, oh shit, and so now they're getting riled up again. But that was also then the conservatives got all riled up because they didn't like Obama and they wanted a Republican president back, and so they got all riled up in 2016 and came back strong. And whereas the liberals became complacent.
How do you feel about the midterms? What are you seeing from your perspective?
Well, I am actually at a very good position to see this because I am a liberal in California, but I'm also in probably one of the most conservative towns in California. Is literally ranked the most redneck town in the state.
Oh, what town?
Norco.
Oh,
Horsetown, USA.
Yep, I know Norco.
Yeah, and so I do have really good access to both very liberal leaning people and very conservative leaning people, and also a lot of middle ground people.
Mm-hmm.
This midterm, at least in California, is very interesting. I know my district, I am not excited because I'm in, I can't remember the number, I think it's 46, but Ken Calvert's my representative, and he's doesn't have any real strong opposition, plus he's got Orange County. And so it was because my district covers Norco, Corona, and then over the hill into Orange County and everything, and so it's into the conservative Orange County, so nothing's happening there. But in other districts in the state, there are a lot of upcoming Democrats and California is very interesting because of the whole with the primary elections where you just have to. It's basically just the two most popular from the primaries, and so you could have Democrat versus Democrat or Republican versus Republican, potentially, and so that did make this primary very interesting, and so this election in November is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
I have been seeing a huge amount of movement from the liberal side about getting people out to vote and people getting more active and trying, and getting out there. I haven't seen the same enthusiasm from Republicans. I have seen some from people that are like, oh no, we can't let the liberals are trying to push back real hard, so we gotta get back there and fight back. But it's not to the same extent as the liberals are really coming out, to like come out against Trump, basically.
Well, I feel like that's been the Democrats' only message is, vote Trump out. I don't feel like
actually that's one thing that they've been trying very hard, especially like not California. California is not so much, but across the other country, especially in purple states and Democrats in red districts, is that they're working very hard to not say anything specifically anti-Trump, or that like they're not talking impeachment, they're not talking about opposition, they're not talking about resistance. I mean, yes, the loudest people are, but the loudest people are in the most liberal areas, and so they can get away with that.
Okay. So what is the message that they're promoting?
Ocasio-Cortez, in New York is one. The up and comer, but and the established people, Feinstein, Waters, they're very anti-Trump. But if you go into Middle America, where you have Democrats in red districts, or more purple states, or just more rural areas that do have Democrats, or in the where they're trying to flip districts that the Democrats are trying to flip from red to blue, in November. They're not. Some of them are going really hard against anti-Trump. But one example is Beto O'Rourke in Texas, who's going after Ted Cruz's seat. He's not running as explicitly anti-Trump. He's actually running very middle of the road liberal, and working very hard to explain very in a lot of detail his reasoning for why he's for the policy decisions and that he would vote for and against.
So what are some of the things that they're like specifically running on, if you know?
I mean, one thing that they are running on that is somewhat consistent is social, more socialized medicine, at least keeping Obamacare, that keeping the ACA, or changing the ACA more to a single payer system. Some of them, some of them are going more, further left in the single payer system. Some of them are just going that we're fighting to keep Medicaid, we're fighting to keep ACA, we're fighting to keep your insurance. That's one thing that has been pretty consistent. One thing is actually it's kind of a funny thing in that this is one of the things that the Republicans years ago were really running on against Obama is killing the deficit, because the latest run of tax cuts and the most recently proposed next run of tax cuts have driven our deficit through the roof. And so that's another thing that Democrats are running on is uncontrolled spending and bringing back the previous tax previous tax setup.
Yeah, I'm not sure how effective that's going to be, but that seems massively
for liberals. It's it is a good thing to people that they're if they're trying to get trying to flip a conservative to go from say some people are they're not a Trump voter, but they're so it's like but they're not a liberal, they're not necessarily liberal. It's like if they're trying to flip them that way, it's not going to be as effective.
Yeah, well,
one of the things that they're go ahead.
Yeah, well, sorry, I mean more in the lines of we need to control spending, but we need to spend way more. It just seems rather discongruous for someone to try to accept that, you know.
Well, but I mean, it's not just we need to control spending, and we need to bring the money, because one of the things that sent the deficit up is we cut taxes so much that now we have no money.
I understand that.
They are running on a tax at least some of them are running on a tax the rich.
Yeah.
Tax the rich to pay for socialized medicine.
What are your to bring it back a little bit more locally? What are your thoughts on Prop 6 if you know what that is? I'll explain it to you if you don't.
Which one's Prop 6?
So Prop 6 is the repeal the gas tax initiative.
I'm indifferent.
Okay.
Honestly, I think that the gas tax increase, I mean, it wasn't great, and I know a lot of people didn't like it. And I think that what should have been done is, what would be more appropriate to do at least would have been basically fix the uncontrolled spending of the previous gas tax.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I looked up. Every year we're dumping $1.5 billion of gas tax money into the general fund. So we should have been spending that on the roads, repairing the roads and keeping them. The other problem is, as far as it goes, California is the largest state with the most drivers. We should be paying the least per capita per driver for our roads. Economies of scale should kick in. We should be getting our asphalt
but we
cheaper.
also have the largest number of roads.
Yeah.
Because we have the largest number of drivers, that also means we have the largest amount of wear and tear on the roads.
No,
So like Arizona has significantly fewer drivers, and they also have significantly fewer roads. There's only one interstate highway, going through Arizona.
They have two.
Oh, they have two. Oh,
yeah.
Well, north
and south. I don't.
It's the only one that I care about, because
the 10 and the 40.
I don't know the number.
Goes north south.
I can't prove this, but my personal my gut tells me that that basically the more drivers you have is actually a net benefit as far as overall costs are concerned, because it's a per gallon tax. So the more driving you do, the more tax revenue is generated.
Well, I think what you both are missing, and maybe this is a key to kind of like maybe blend both your points, is in the 90s there was a large amount of contractual, let's say, out of government contracts when it came to fixing our roads to major private organizations, and ended up that the companies that were contracted out by Caltrans to fix the roads never really did. So they fixed a minimal amount of the highways and a minimal amount of the roads in the 90s, and got paid exorbitant amount of state money to do so. I think that's the bigger problem in this scenario. Because, like I said, our costs should be lower. And I hate to break it to you, this was under the I forgot who was the governor, but he was a Republican.
Was it Wilson?
I think so. Yeah. And also the energy crisis in the late 90s, in the early 2000s stems from Wilson.
Well, that got put more on
Davis.
Gray Davis.
Yeah, it got put on Davis, but it started under Wilson. But also, what started under Wilson that not a lot of people talk about is that through Caltrans, there were a lot of contracts that came out to private companies to actually fix the roads, and they really just didn't do a good job.
Yeah.
And so the idea when it came to this to the multiple gas taxes that come afterwards was that the state had to endure the cost of the failure of them not overseeing the money that they spent earlier, in a sense.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it sucks because as Will may know for certain, how at least we have operated, how we make our income is on the roads, and we get affected by the gas tax more so than, I'd say, the majority of California.
Yeah.
Of the populace.
I guess one of the other things I was looking for is kind of an answer to how how effective or if Prop 6 is something that's going to get that gets liberals riled up or not. It doesn't sound like it does.
I don't think so.
It doesn't. I think that it doesn't have a clear enough alternative.
Well,
at least it hasn't been advertised.
It hasn't been advertised properly. But the alternative is we spend the money that's going to the general fund on the roads. And then if that's not enough, then we can reevaluate.
Like enforcing that and all that stuff is like, we'll say we're gonna do it. And
well, the funny thing is, I was working the recall of State Senator Josh Newman. Do you know anything about that?
No.
Okay, so in my district there was a state senator that barely won. It was like 1,000 votes. So the people that are doing the gas tax initiative now started by targeting his seat for a recall because he voted for it. So one of the things that I noticed is it was a very effective tool to be able to pin this gas tax on him. I got people that I'm sure were incredibly liberal and would definitely vote, for a Democrat candidate, but on this issue, they were incredibly upset with this essentially regressive tax on the poor, which is how I was selling it, because it's pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
So, because this is the type of tax that massively adversely affects people with lower incomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially because people with lower incomes have to drive the most because they usually live further away from the jobs.
And even if they don't, they still don't. The gas costs them the same amount, and per mile costs them the same amount, but they don't have the income that someone of a higher socioeconomic status does.
Well, I think why you said what, 1.5 billion?
Yep.
Or million?
Billion with a B.
Billion.
Like in boy.
Goes in the general fund.
Yep.
Is that California, and this is something I recently learned, was that California has a thing called Prop 98 from 1988, where a minimum of 40% of the budget, of the general budget, has to go to education.
That's absurd.
Yeah, and this is 1988.
Yeah.
And so this is something that actually affects California budgeting, and this is why California has so many special funds.
Jeez. Okay. And so they can claim that it's going to a specific thing that they need it to go to, but then they pull it out for something else.
Well,
basically an accounting trick.
It seems like that's what they did with the gas tax, but actually the opposite happens. Is that the state puts everything in special funds, so they don't have to put it in the general fund.
Okay.
And because
gotcha.
Because if you have more money in the general fund, more money goes to education.
Yeah.
And less money goes to whatever they need to run the bureaucracy.
Yeah. Okay.
And so what they do is that they take money, they put it all in special funds, so they have some going to education, but they have enough to go to everything else.
Well, the amount of money we're spending per child on education is absolutely insane.
Well, it's insane, but the thing is that it's actually by voter proposition.
No, I know.
It wasn't a law.
No, well, it is a law. It just wasn't passed in the legislature. It was a voter enacted law
by the voter.
Yeah.
And so
I know we get
maybe this is something
into...
to add to the context of the conversation, is that California is actually really hindered by this.
Yeah.
As the state. Now, if you assume that California as a state is running effectively, right, it's a different thing. But still, 40% going into education, it really affects everything else.
Of course.
And so probably that's a reason why some of the special fund for that gas tax, because that gas tax is not going in the general fund, majority of it is going into a special fund, but some of it going into the general fund to kind of prop that up, because everything else is in special funds.
Yeah. It's just crazy to me that Jerry Brown's talking about launching satellites and all that kind of just nonsense when we have these kind of problems.
I mean, as much as conservatives in the state don't like Jerry Brown,
no, I know.
I don't. comparatively to other California politicians,
I
his
know,
side,
I know.
He has done a good job,
Yeah.
a better job that I would have expected of putting into the rainy day fund.
Okay.
Now, that will change when Gavin Newsom more or less may become governor. He probably will.
Oh yeah. The Cox numbers are just to get both campaigns to pay more money in advertising. That's the big scam with these polls. The polls are all conducted by people who directly benefit from polls being very close to each other, especially the closer you get to the election.
So if you think about between Jerry Brown and let's say Schwarzenegger, who was a Republican, Jerry Brown has put more into a rainy day fund than Schwarzenegger did.
Well, yeah.
Now,
Arnold Schwarzenegger being a Republican, yeah. Well, he was also governor during that horrible financial crisis, so it's not like he had a ton of money just sitting around to be put into general funds.
Well, but it's not like he saved a bunch of money either.
Well, yeah, the problem is that he got into this. When was he elected? 2006?
No, it was like 2004.
Are you sure?
Was it 06? It probably was 06. But nevertheless, the thing I want to say about Jerry Brown, though, is that comparatively to other, let's say, candidates and or politicians in his party, like Gavin Newsom, who's the lieutenant governor, Jerry Brown has done more to kind of dissuade them from taking out of the general fund or putting less into the general fund than they actually want.
Mm-hmm.
To defend Jerry Brown for that little moment inkling. But nevertheless, I don't particularly like him. But
yeah,
I mean, I can only take what I can get. Also, as a Second Amendment supporter, Jerry Brown has done more than the majority of California politicians. And done the most. So simultaneously has done the most.
As upset as that makes us, I'm curious to know what Will's thoughts on gun control are.
Uh-oh.
Gun control, okay.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Oh yeah.
Break my heart,
we're jumping.
I do want to add some clarification.
Okay.
Schwarzenegger was
governor
2003. From 2004 to 2010.
Yeah.
Oh, I was right.
Through 2010. Sorry.
Yeah.
Look at that.
So I guess he did have some time to put something away, but
yeah,
he did get saddled with a horrible economic recession in 2007. So
he did. That's true.
Just to give him some credit, not that he's my favorite guy either.
What? It's okay. Or Tom.
But back to my question, because I'm curious to hear this. We haven't had a gun control discussion on this podcast.
All right. Well, see, I have 2 points on that. Do you want to hear what I wish in a perfect world, or do you want to hear what I would like to see realistically?
Well, in a perfect world, I would say we don't need any weapons, but
no, in a perfect world, everyone should have a lot of guns.
I mean, never use them on anybody.
Exactly.
Not it.
They're only used on pictures of disliked celebrities and girlfriends and boyfriends.
Exactly. But let's go with the less perfect scenario, kind of the real world. You know, what you think should happen.
All right. So I am quite liberal, but I'm also very realistic on the realities of gun control. So one thing, the first thing that I want to see is better communication, between agencies on the whole, when it comes to background checks.
Okay.
I personally would like to see universal background checks for gun ownership.
Okay.
For gun purchases.
Okay, so you like the background check idea?
Yeah. I mean, realistically, I like to even what is it? I like to compare guns to automobiles, and so it's like I personally think the registration I don't see it as bad of a thing as a lot of people, say. It's like that, like, it's like, I don't think it's entirely realistic to expect, but I don't think it, it's like when people that are against gun registration, I think, are a little bit loony.
So
at least that their argument on it is a little bit far-fetched.
So I can understand your point of view on the registration. How do you feel that fits into the text of the Second Amendment and what it says?
Well, it says that it should not restrict. Well,
I can read it for you real quick if you'd like.
Yeah. Well, it says that we're not, you can't restrict the ownership of bearing arms, basically.
Yeah. So the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed would be the terminology. And
so I don't see how registering your gun, like, if it's like registering your gun doesn't stop you from owning it. It just stops you from selling it to someone who shouldn't, who maybe who wouldn't pass a background check or something. It's like, that's one of the things. Like, there was a study done in, I think it was Pittsburgh, a couple of years ago, and they found that the majority, I don't want to give the wrong, say the wrong things and give the wrong impression, but they did a study, and that a large number of handguns that were used in crimes were not used by the people that owned them. And some people were saying, see, look, they're being stolen and everything, but it's like, it's it's like, it's not, something else there's something else happening there. It's not the gun buying, it wasn't the person that bought the gun and that used it, but how did the people who did use the gun in a crime get access to the gun? And in this study, they found that, like, a large number of the people didn't respond when they called to figure it out. The gun owners didn't respond to questions. The people that did respond, about half of them just had reported the gun stolen, and like 70% of those people reported the gun stolen after they were contacted saying that their gun was used in the crime.
Okay.
Well,
and it's like things like that. It's like, see, if we had better, more consistent background checks and gun registration, like, you can't sell your car. I can't just give you my car. You give me cash, I give you my car, and then we're good. And then if you go and use my car in a bank robbery and they find it, they're going to come to me and say, hey, your car was used in crime, you're a suspect now. Or even less extreme than that, they're going to say, hey, you still own this car, you still need to insure it. So you still need to pay for registration.
So
if you have registration of guns, if you register your guns, it's much more difficult for me to buy a gun and then give it to somebody else or sell it to somebody else who's going to use it illegally.
Well, hey, Will, if you don't mind me, now when it comes to registration, and I'm just gonna make this perfectly clear, as I think we talked when we talk about war, and we talk about guns. I'm probably the furthest to the extreme than my two other co-hosts. When it comes to registration, the fear is when it comes to confiscation, right? And as media outlets will tell you that, when you register your firearms, right, they're not going to be confiscated. But when it comes to the state of California, they have been confiscated.
Well, in Hawaii most recently.
Well, recently was a farmer out in Bakersfield who wanted to register his firearms through state sanctioned
that's
means
because he
of
was registering a firearm that they had deemed illegal, which wouldn't necessarily be an issue if the...
Well, no. He registered a firearm you could say was deemed illegal, simultaneously being deemed legal enough to register.
Interesting.
That is a second topic of just how the law is written.
Because
the laws here in California are contradictory when it comes to firearms. So what guess, can be illegal can be simultaneously legal.
I guess the bigger like philosophical question I have for Will on this is, do you think that the reduction of firearms in the population is going to reduce the crime rate?
I think that's a lot more complicated question than can be directly answered.
Well, of course, it's not one we can answer with certainty. That's why I'm asking more for your feelings, because I feel like the human capacity for evil is limitless, and that people are going to want to kill, maim, and harm others with whatever they can get their hands on. And you look at like London, they have a complete, they're an island nation, so it's significantly harder to get firearms into the country. So they banned them, and they have a significantly lower, gun crime rate because of it. But if you want to look at like actual deaths and murders and crime, they've actually, for the first time in a long time, they have a higher rate of murders than the United States or even New York City.
I'm not sure your statistics on murders are accurate. I know that one big thing that people were saying is that that countries in Europe like Britain that have stricter gun laws have higher violent crime rates than the U.S., but that statistic is misleading because they do not rate violent crime. They have a much broader categorization of what constitutes violent crime than the U.S. does. So of course they're going to have a higher number.
Yeah, there's a USA Today article that says that the murder rate in London is higher than New York. So just I can share that link with you. Just to be clear about that.
Gotcha. So London specifically, not all of England.
Yeah. I'm sorry if I made that error.
Or you might have said London and I just misheard you.
Of course. Yeah. I'm not sure which.
Yeah. And so comparing city to city isn't directly isn't the most effective.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm trying to type something while talking.
No, that's okay. I guess that I don't know how else you would compare it. You can't compare the entire United States to England.
Yeah.
Because we have much different populations and that sort of stuff. But if you want to look at a large urban metropolitan area, London and New York, population wise are not dissimilar. So I feel like they would be two places you could fairly effectively compare.
Yeah, because there are urban areas, but there's still further stuff that you have to look into with that. But I mean, and murder rate. I mean, let me try and formulate an argument here, like get coherent. Reducing guns isn't going to stop crime. People are, I agree with you that people are going to, people are going to do evil things whether they have a gun or not. But that doesn't, to me at least, doesn't feel like a good argument for letting everyone have a gun.
Okay.
And, if I may interject, is right. So I want to kind of, now granted, maybe there is a line that in this conversation that has been drawn, but something I was leaning up to maybe before we got into the statistics, the stats with London and New York and everything else like that, right? Because I brought up something about confiscation, right? So because of the laws that have been enacted here in the state of California, right, as contradictory as they are, there have been more or less confiscation. So they're actually, at least how I perceive it, and maybe my co-host or even maybe you, Will, can dissuade me, but there are things within the registration process of purchasing a firearm here in the state of California that, I don't know, kind of irk me or let's say kind of get me concerned.
Yeah.
So, well, I don't know. Has anyone here, except for myself, anyone here bought a long arm, a rifle or a shotgun here in the state of California?
I guess that
Ryan, just answer this. Have you bought a long arm in the state of California? Kevin?
I have not.
No.
Okay. So now, in the state of California, before I can continue, in the state of California, if you cannot lock your firearm, so let's say like with a pistol, there's a gun lock, or even a rifle or a shotgun, you can put a gun lock on it, so it cannot be used.
Just for clarification, you're not talking about a safety, you're talking about like an actual lock that bars you from being able to fire the firearm.
Yes, okay. I'm actually talking about a gun lock. If you cannot properly lock your firearm, you need a safe, right? That's a requirement by the state of California. Now, in the state of California, if you cannot lock your firearm, so if the seller, the dealer, cannot issue you a lock that you purchase, but cannot issue you a lock for your firearm, you have to have a safe. So in the case of having a double-barrel shotgun, which I own, right? I have purchased legally, I have registered legally, it's to my name, to my address, right? For that, this is all, everything is clarified. I cannot properly lock it with the gun lock, right? It's a double-barrel shotgun, it breaks open, right, from the stock. So I have to have a safe. But now California, because it requires a safe, it requires what safe I have, it requires what model it is, who its manufacturer is, the works of the safe. And so, from my question about confiscation is if the state is required to know what safe it is, right? And it can say broadly, and I can accept this broadly because of, let's say, a general rule of safety. But I think there's an underlying tone of if it knows what safe it is in, if there's a warrant, let's say for my arrest or warrant for my property, they know exactly what they're looking for.
Well, if they have a warrant, then I don't see why they shouldn't know exactly what they're looking for. I guess
what I mean is if they're looking for a safe and they know exactly what is in the safe.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm. So it's not like
if they have a warrant. Look, that's where the problem arises. If they have a warrant, then they have every right to know what's in the safe and to know what to expect. The problem arises
if they have a warrant for your arrest. There's a good assumption that you've committed a crime, or at least are suspected of committing a crime.
They've gone through the legal process of getting the right to search your property. So if they can search your property,
but so let's say okay,
they can get your bank records and
specific. Hold on, warrants have to be specific. So when it comes to my property, it's like, okay, where in my property do they have to search? The thing is that I am required to divulge information extracurricular to the property that I reside in. So it's not like, okay, I need to search your bedroom.
The issue
more now, the state knows at hand is I'm not just searching your house, I'm searching for a safe with this serial number, and we know exactly what is in that safe.
So the problem.
Do you have to specify where exactly on your property that safe is located?
No.
I guess
you could bury it, and
you're right.
Possibly.
So they're because they have the same thing. Like they have the right to search. It's the same thing for your car. It's like they'll know your car. They can look for your car if they have a warrant for your arrest and they find your car in a public parking lot or on your private property. They can search your car. They don't have to know where it is. But if they find it, they know what they're looking for, and if they have a warrant, a specific warrant to search this car with this registration number, they have then they have the right to look for it. You don't have to tell them where it is. You don't but if they find it and it's like it's on the street, they have a warrant for it, they can search the car.
So I completely agree with that assessment, Will. I think the problem you have, Mikey, is that unless the safe, I would say that you have an argument about requiring you to have a safe, and I would say based on the text of the Second Amendment, what they should do to get you to de facto own a safe would be make laws so stringent that if you lose your gun and it's used to commit a crime, you are now culpable for some sort of a felony. So that way you're basically required to get a safe, because if you lose track of that gun, there's serious consequences. And that would be entirely within the Second Amendment.
They tried passing a law and it failed.
Yeah.
And
so
in the state of California,
yeah.
Jerry Brown actually overruled it because the idea is that what was it? The law stated that if you did not report your gun stolen within a certain amount of time, it was a felony. You would go to prison.
Yeah, and I agree with that.
But in some cases, you don't know if your gun is stolen or not.
Then if you have, here's the problem. I don't care if you know if your gun's stolen or not. You should. If you are not keeping track of your gun to the point where it can get stolen and you don't know for a year, then you weren't properly keeping track of your gun, and that's your fault. So the problem is that you have to look at the text of the Constitution, and at least in my opinion. So it says the right for you to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well, the registration doesn't keep you from being able to own the firearm, so that's not infringing it. So they in my opinion, as far as the Second Amendment is concerned, should have every right to require registration if they would like. Now, the component of the law that requires you to have a specific safe or to be able to lock the weapon, that would infringe upon your rights to own the gun. But like I said, the workaround to that is that you make losing your gun such an onerous responsibility that it doesn't happen and people take care of it themselves.
But if it's still out of your control, see, but the thing I think you're missing is that it's out of your control. So
yeah, so
in a way that hold on, you've made it so it's so onerous. But nevertheless, it's still going to happen, right? So let's say if it's so onerous for your car to get stolen.
If my car should be onerous.
Let me continue. I'm not done. But the thing is that if you made it so onerous, right? Someone stole your car, robbed a bank, and then ran a whole bunch of people over, right? And you didn't have enough time to report your car stolen. And you still get a felony because your car got stolen.
Look, Mikey, you're taking a scenario.
That's the thing.
You're taking a scenario that I didn't talk about.
You've put it after the fact.
I never talked about that.
No, hold on. You granted.
No, you
put it at a year.
Yeah. See, so there is some reasonable amount of time.
How about someone broke into your house? How about you're gone? Someone broke into your house.
So I'm gone for a year.
Robbed the bank and shot somebody. So before the time you ever found out. So it could be within a day. It could be within a week.
Then you need.
What is the time frame that the law was trying to was trying to say you have?
It was a couple days.
Okay, it was less than a couple days. Okay, the couple days problem is a problem, but here's the thing: it should be your responsibility that you either A, keep the gun in a safe at your home that you know will not get broken into and could not get stolen from, or B, you go and you check it into a service that will hold on to your gun while you are not capable of looking after it. There are very reasonable accommodations that can be made to make sure that you don't go afoul of this law. And that doesn't infringe upon your right to have that gun. It infringes upon your right to be able to lose track of your gun, which you don't have. You do not have a right to lose track of your firearms. That's insane.
But I think that if something got stolen, and again, you've, as Will and even yourself has, let's say, argued that is similar to a car. If someone stole your car, right?
Yeah, but I know where my car.
Should you be responsible if that person ran somebody over or used it in a bank robbery?
But Mikey, I can look up the GPS coordinates.
If the car is stolen and you don't find, and you know that it's stolen and you don't report it stolen, and your car is used in a crime, you're going to be suspected and probably, questioned for possibly aiding and abetting in that crime because you didn't report your car stolen.
Well, how about this? My car has gone missing plenty of times. How about this? So there's one time I was at my friend's house. I fell asleep, passed out, and it got towed, right, without me being awake for a multiple hour span. And then when I woke up, my car was gone. Now, within a couple hours span, a lot could have happened to it.
If
now,
if it was
granted, it was towed and was put in a towing lot, but it's safe it was stolen and used to commit something, it could have happened, right? But I don't think that the owner of my vehicle going missing, nor do I think that if someone broke into your house and stole your firearm when they say you were away, and this is why this law got turned down, was that because the time frame in which it was stolen.
I agree, the time frame of 2 or 3 days, yes. But if you can't keep track of your gun on a month-to-month basis and it gets stolen and used in a crime, that's your fault. If you have so many guns, or conversely, if you are so careless with your gun that it goes missing, and for an entire 30-day period you do not know where that gun is, nor do you know that it is missing, that's a problem. You should go to jail if it's used in a crime.
I don't think so. No.
I agree with him completely, because you are in possession of a dangerous weapon, and if you're not keeping track, if you're not keeping at least a certain reasonable amount of responsibility.
Now, should you go to jail nevertheless, or should you go to jail if you don't report it?
You should go to jail if it's unreported.
Okay.
If
there we go. Maybe
if you don't just the
30 days,
reporting part.
Mikey, 30 days.
It's not if someone steals your gun and they use it. No, you're not responsible for that. But if someone steals your gun and then a month goes by and you don't report it stolen and then used in a crime,
maybe that's where
that's what I've been saying the whole time. I'm not saying that
I didn't hear that.
A carte blanche, you should always be held responsible.
If it's a month and you didn't report your firearm stolen, then you're retarded.
Yeah.
Sorry, my bad.
Okay, so we've found a common ground where we agree on.
And there's no constitutional protection.
Even I agree that a 2 to 3 day period is unreasonable.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I know. How about this? I know. I can tell you for exact for the amount of firearms that I own, which is probably more by the average square foot than the majority of the United States at this point, because I don't have that much square footage. If something is missing, then something is missing.
And
so if you don't report it, then then my bad. Maybe I wasn't that. I was thinking of if it was reported.
Oh no! If you report it, no. If you do everything in your power to report it and inform the authorities about who you think might have stolen it. If you're doing everything in your power to make sure that situation gets taken care of properly without the loss of life, absolutely you shouldn't be charged with anything.
Maybe that's where
exactly, because like the example I gave earlier about the study in I think it was Pittsburgh, was that about half of the guns used in the crimes were reported stolen, but like 2/3 of that were reported stolen after the owner of the gun was contacted and saying that it was used in a crime.
That's proof.
That kind of thing is like, I read that study and I'm like, why the fuck were those people not arrested?
Yeah, I think that they should go to jail too. Why are those
people not being punished for?
There's nothing in the Constitution that protects you from your own stupidity. And the fact is, if you have a gun and you are not keeping track of it to the point where it can go missing for 30 consecutive days and you have no idea, then it's your fault that whatever crime happened with that gun.
Something happens. No, the thing that I'm concerned about is when it comes to registration, is that registration, and at least from folks that I know, that I have personal contact with through through my day-to-day life, it does lead to confiscation. And so
on its own does not lead to confiscation. There's other extraneous factors.
No, registration is used.
It is
for confiscation.
Mikey's right, but the problem is that if it's a carte blanche confiscation, then that's a violation of the Second Amendment and should be prosecuted. But the actual registration itself is not against the text of the Constitution. So what you should be fighting for is either a law or an amendment that would protect that, Mikey, because you don't have a right not to be not to be registered. Now, when it's bought,
is that if I buy a firearm, so just think of this, right? I buy a firearm that's perfectly legal, That is, it follows the guidelines now.
Well, I don't think that there should be.
No, hold on.
No, okay.
You give it a year, and then the law, and then it changes, and then things change to the exact point that where it's like, okay, well, it's not really legal until you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. So if you look at the story of the AR-15 here in California, right? If you bought an AR-15 as, let's say, as is in 2014, you would have been fine, right? Collapsible stock,
but
pistol
Mikey,
grip, much
the
of the features that it owns. But then you give it to now, 2018, 2019.
So the problem is that the problem is that, in my opinion, whatever California's done in the to change the laws most likely is completely unconstitutional. So that, in the face of it, shouldn't happen. It should be struck down by the court. The problem is that the registration itself does not go against the way that the Second Amendment is written.
You can say that it does not go against the Constitution, but then later down the road, it is used as a tool to confiscate. That's
completely different. That is a completely different argument.
Slope, yeah. And that on its own is not a reason for not passing a law.
Well,
that's a reason for passing extra amendments to a law to make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen. That unconstitutional.
But it does happen. But the thing is, it does
here's
happen.
The thing, Mikey. They can still confiscate the guns without the registration.
And I know you say that it's a different completely issue.
It is. It's an entirely different issue.
Yeah, I know plenty of people who are affected by this. No, I'm affected by this.
I agree.
And
I agree that you're affected by it.
When it comes down to the fact that I don't see a difference, because at the end of the day, the results is no different to me.
But it is different. It is different, Mikey, because you have to look at what the Constitution says. Okay, does it say something that means that you can't register guns? Okay, nope. There's no language in the Constitution that has anything to say about the government having a list of guns. In fact, it says that you should have the guns because you should be in a militia, and so a well-regulated militia was a big enough deal that they specifically outlined you being able to have these guns in the first place to be part of the militia. Guess what was the number one thing you had to do as part of a militia? What was the number one thing? Do you know, Mikey?
Defend the nation.
No, you had to register. Yes. You had to register yourself as being available to be open if something happens. And part of registering yourself with the militia meant you registered your gun with it as well. So gun registration is actually baked into the Second Amendment, because being part of a militia, you have to register your gun. You cannot be an effective part of a militia if they don't know what guns you're bringing to the table.
Well, I can't be effective with gun in the militia as the state that I'm supposed to be the militia of seizes my firearms.
I agree. I agree, Mikey. That's an entirely separate point.
And that's what I'm trying to get at. And no matter what you say at this point, and all granted, right, all due respect, is no matter at the end of the day, the results are the same.
The results
I'm affected.
The results would be the same.
And if I'm supposed to be the militia, right? If I'm supposed to be militia who is supposed to be well regulated and well armed to protect the state and therefore the nation, and the same state that I am supposed to protect seizes my firearms, that's what I'm getting at.
I have no idea how that's connected to registration.
It's connected to registration.
How?
Is because the state knows that I am registered with firearms. They can come to my door, knock down, and say, hey, you have these firearms. We want them now.
Okay.
But they can't just do that. And no one wants them to be able to just do that.
That's not true. That's not true, Will. There's plenty of people that want gun confiscation.
Plenty.
There's a lot of people, and Democrats have become significantly more brazen about their gun confiscation beliefs, and of course that's against the Second Amendment. But you can't fight for a right that you don't have, Mikey, and you don't have the right to not be registered. You can fight for the right. You can fight and petition the government. I don't have
the right to bear firearms.
But you do.
Sorry. You do. Mikey, you said that you have guns that are registered. right?
They are registered. Yes.
Have they been taken?
Any time? No, not yet. Not yet. Well, the thing is I can say no, but I'm gonna say not yet, because down the line they might. As I've seen in the character of the state, have I seen the laws in this state, is that when it comes to firearms, they have registered, they have criminalized, they have illegalized, and they have regulated certain functions of firearms. Now, for the firearms that are registered,
and
it
I would
has
say
not come to pass at this moment.
And Mikey, I would say all of those regulations on the firearms themselves are illegal, but that's an entirely separate point. It's an entirely separate point from them wanting a registration from you, which I don't like. I don't like the idea of the gun being registered. Okay, I don't like it. But the problem is you have to come up with a principled argument based on the law as it's written. You cannot just say, "Oh my gosh, slippery slope, this is going to happen."
For me, the principle is that if the Second Amendment cannot be infringed, right? The right to bear arms is not to be infringed, and then regulate when it comes to registration, which leads to confiscation.
It can in some cases, yes. It has led some cases. I agree that it has led to that. Yes,
it has led to confiscation. Therefore, it is used to limit my access to firearms.
That's not true. The act of getting the list and then the act of using the list to do something are two separate things. Okay? I can have a list of names that I never look at and don't do anything with, and then I can decide I want to break the government. Why? Having lists is basically what the government's supposed to do.
Well,
there's
it's
a
supposed
census,
to do,
there's lots
but
of
it's
lists.
also supposed to act upon those lists.
No, it doesn't have to act on anything.
Oh, it doesn't have to, but if it makes the list, right? If it makes a list and you're paying money for the government to have these lists,
what if the list is just there to ensure that people that aren't protected to have a firearm, like a felon, we're able to confiscate their weapons? We should be able to confiscate a felon's weapons.
Well, but then when it comes to my weapons,
you shouldn't ever be confiscated because you're not a felon. Are you a felon?
Why am I on the list?
Are you a felon?
If I'm not a felon,
you have to have everyone on the list.
What's stopping you from ever becoming a felon?
Mikey, we have to have you on the list because A, you might become a felon, or B, when you try to register it, you might be a felon. So the fact is that the list only works if we put everyone on there. It doesn't work if I only register.
Because that prevents. Right? No. How about this? No, because this is something that actually I believe got passed. Right? When it comes to the expansion of those that can, what do they call it? They call it a firearm restraining order. So anybody that I know,
and that would be illegal. That I can know, Mikey, and that should be illegal and struck down based on the text of the Second Amendment.
Not yet. No, they just passed it.
Just because it hasn't been struck down yet doesn't mean that registration's the problem.
It hasn't been struck down yet. Still means they'll seize my firearms. So no, when it comes to a firearm restraining order,
and the government
that has not been struck down anywhere in the country, the thing is that the firearm restraining order is that anybody can petition the court to say, or at least near the state.
Mikey,
hold on. There's a specific amount of people, right, that they just expanded here in the state that can petition the court to have a firearm restraining order to come to my house and seize my firearms without charging me of a crime.
Okay, and
they just come in, and then I have to petition the court to receive my firearms back.
Has that happened to someone yet? Has someone had their firearms confiscated in that manner? Has that occurred?
Well, hold on. Not yet. Because
so the problem is the Supreme Court.
It has happened.
Okay, so it has happened.
But now they've expanded here in the state. Before, it used to be family members, and it used to be, I believe, medical professionals.
So Mikey, what you need to do is go find that person and convince them to sue the government, because the Supreme Court can't knock down a law.
How about this way? Well, no, Ryan, think of this way. So now, because they've expanded it to professors, teachers, friends, outside relatives. So somebody has a beef with me. They petition the court, or a teacher thinks I'm weird, which has happened. Professors think I'm just a little odd in the head. right?
Yep.
They come, they petition the court,
Mhm.
they file a firearm restraining order. The
Okay.
cops come to my door,
Yep.
they seize all my firearms, and then I have to spend 2 years
You should
or
shoot
3
them.
years to get my firearms back.
Then you should shoot
So
them
how
at the
is that
door.
right for me?
You should shoot them at the door.
Oh, I should shoot them at
Yeah.
the door then.
Yeah,
I
they're
should shoot the
violating your
door,
Second
and
Amendment
then I
right by
die.
confiscating your guns.
Well,
Well,
how
do you
about this?
do you
Then
believe?
I
Okay,
die.
then you need to wait.
Under a
then
legal warrant.
then Mikey, you
No,
need, no, it's
Ryan,
not a legal
under
warrant.
a legal fucking warrant.
No,
How
it's
does that
not.
look good for
It's
me?
not. It's
It
not
does
on
not.
a. It's not under a legal warrant because the warrant was based off of an infringement of your Second Amendment
Well,
rights.
You think so?
No,
but guess what?
That's a
when
fact.
it comes to the outside, no, it does not. When it comes to Will watching TV, it does not.
I don't know what your.
It
I don't
looks
know what
like,
your point
they
is.
had a warrant for my house. They try to seize my firearms because I could have been dangerous, and then I started shooting law enforcement officials on my front yard.
No, I understand that. The
No, Ryan, fuck you.
I'm just your options are get them confiscated or shoot them. Either way, I think you're in the right. And once they're confiscated,
either way in the right, but other way I'm fucked.
No, you're not. You're not. And
Either I die and then I spend an exorbitant amount of money to
You're
prove
not gonna-
to the court
you're not gonna
that
spend
thinks
any
I'm
money.
guilty.
You're not gonna spend
to
any
get
money.
things that I have a right for.
Mikey, the
No.
NRA, there's plenty of organizations that would love that are chomping at the bit to get you to sign up as a plaintiff when that happens.
I think you are an optimist at this point.
I'm
because nevertheless,
not.
I have to spend money that I don't have.
You're not going
to
have to
hold a
spend
right
anything.
that I should have, that is granted me by this government as a citizen of this nation.
Mikey,
the
you have
is
every
that
right to petition the Supreme Court.
Unfortunately, I believe, and maybe this is the whiskey talking, but I fortunately believe that you are kowtowing and that you're compromising.
I'm not
right,
compromising
for
anything.
a better goal, maybe, hopefully, that you future down the end.
I'm not, Mikey, I'm not
Hey,
compromising anything.
Hey, Mikey, I have a question for you on this note.
Okay.
Does you registering your firearms cause that to happen?
I think so. And this is why. It's because the government has a list with my name, with my firearm, with my serial number on it.
Yeah.
And at one point, when the government changes its mind, which the state government has every year, almost every election cycle at this point, has changed its mind, what is an acceptable firearm, at the end of the day, it's going to choose which it likes and which it does not like.
No. I'm talking about this petition, the firearm restraining order thing that you were just talking about. That where like your teacher or your doctor or someone can petition the court and say, "Hey, this person's unstable. Take their guns." Does not registering your firearms stop that from happening?
Well, how about this? The only thing we'll know is that if those medical professionals, or if your friend, now medical professionals would not know because I don't tell my doctors if I ever go to the doctor, but they don't. My doctors don't know, even though by law they're supposed to ask. My friends could, students.
Yeah, but so your friends, for example. If you were not required to register your guns and you never registered your guns that you currently own and have registered, would your friends not know that those guns existed?
Well, would you not tell your friends that you had guns? It depends on what friends I've told, and if the friends I have told, more or less probably would not, because I don't think my friends I'm unstable by any matter of the fact. So
this basically. This restraining order is only effective if the people petitioning for your firearms to be taken to know that you have firearms. It's nothing to do with the government knowing if you have a firearm.
The government looks at what firearms that you have.
But isn't this firearm restraining order someone saying, I think this person is unstable, you need to take away their guns?
Well, yes, but the thing is that the government
how can they say take away their guns if they don't know?
Well, the professor could have heard you answer a question and you said, "Yeah, I own a gun," and then they go, "This is the scenario Mikey's envisioning." Then they report you to the government. The government goes, "Oh, great, we've got a list of registered guns under his name. We're going to go to his house and take those away." Is that essentially the? If
registration didn't exist, if no guns are registered,
if no guns are registered,
then would the government then say, okay, well, if the professor heard him say, yeah, I have a gun, and the professor then went to the government and said, hey, this guy has a gun, I think he's dangerous, would the government say, oh, well, he doesn't have anything registered, so we're not going to check?
Yeah,
oh, no, they would check. They would still...
So you have problems with this law.
Regardless of if you had it registered, yes, if you didn't have the registrations, they wouldn't necessarily know how many guns that you have.
So it actually would cause you more pain.
Because they would search a lot more because they don't know how much you have. And so if they find one gun, they might, well, what if he has 2? What if he has 20? What if he has 300?
Mikey,
they're going to search until they can find, until they know, until they feel sure.
So for the sake of causing me less pain down the road, I tell the government exactly what I have, and I just give them what I have, even though that I have not committed any crime. Right, so let's say the professor just goes and says, oh, hey, I'm uncomfortable with a student in my class because he owns a firearm or firearms that he suggested. Because I'm uncomfortable, have this court order, which then the court acts upon that through the police, comes to my door, kicks down my door, drags me out of my house, takes everything that I own, even though I have not committed a crime.
No, I agree.
And then I have to petition the court.
I have massive problems with the law.
And putting an exorbitant amount of finance to get my right back.
I understand it, and that situation is not pleasant. I'm not. I understand.
Well, it's not pleasant, but I'm fucked.
Yes,
and people like me.
But registering your guns does not create you to be more fucked, and not registering your guns does not stop you from being fucked in that situation.
Agreed. The problem is the law. The law is the problem.
Registered or not, you are equally fucked. And if anything, having registered guns
what
might
makes
make
me
you
fucked?
more fucked.
No, the difference is what makes me fucked. It's when the state decides, right? When the government of the state decides what is not acceptable and what is acceptable as a firearm. Now, you all might not know
that's not legal.
The state of California changes its mind on a year-to-year basis,
and none of that should be legal. And the Supreme Court
shouldn't be legal, but it is.
I know.
The thing that's what I am challenging you on, Ryan.
What are you challenging me on? I don't get it. You can't dictate that a government can't do something that it has not been explicitly laid out in law that it can't do. And what you're saying is, in order to protect a right that may be infringed in the future, you believe that you have a right that is not outlined.
Now.
No, okay.
No, it is being infringed now.
I'm not saying. I'm talking about a hypothetical situation where we didn't have this law and then it was put into place. Okay, so we didn't have gun registrations. We now require gun registrations, and then in the future we have a new law based on the gun registration that comes and confiscates your gun. That's essentially the sequence of events that you're afraid of, and the problem is that you do not have a basis right now to say that the government cannot require you to register your guns. What you need to be advocating for is laws at the federal level or an amendment to the Constitution that enshrines your right not to have a gun registration. That's the issue. I would agree with you, and I might potentially support that initiative if you were to go that way. The problem is you're trying to say you have a right that you don't have outlined in the Constitution. And the government is not precluded from doing that to you and making you go through those steps. And the whole thing, my biggest point is we have to remember the proper way of going about things, okay? So California is improperly going about restricting your access to guns.
Yeah, but nevertheless, I get fucked. That's the thing. I get screwed. I'm on the bottom of the shit stick on this one.
Everybody is in different scenarios. There's all sorts of victims in this world. Everyone's a victim.
Oh, fantastic.
That's
nice.
We have to
because I obey the laws, I still get screwed. Fantastic. Thank you, Brian.
The registration doesn't do that. The registration doesn't
No, I think it does.
But then you have to be fighting for a federal law or a state law or a state proposition, something that would keep the state from being able to do that.
Well, no, because the idea when it comes to the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th Amendment, right? When it comes to the theme of that, if you want to think of it that way, is that they have to prove that I am guilty. Everything that I have outlined does not prove that I'm guilty. They already assumed that I am guilty.
The registration has no assumption of guilt whatsoever, and that's what we're talking about. You keep trying to conflate the fact that this law is completely illegal, the way that it stands and the way that it works, with registration. And the problem is they are two entirely separate things. So I can agree with you that the law as it's written, where they can just take away your guns without any due process, is completely horrifying and terrible.
And they use registration as the basis of that.
They can use anything.
They use that as the tool
It just makes their job slightly easier. They're still going to do the same search. They're still going to look for the extra illegal guns that you may or may not have, regardless. And so the problem is that the registration didn't do anything to make this worse on you. It didn't do anything. They're still going to search for other extra guns you have that aren't registered. They're still going to search you even if you don't have any registered guns. So in no way does the registration impact you once you've been snitched on by your professor.
And in the situation where a gun that you currently have that is currently legal, and if if in the future they make that gun illegal, if you registered that gun, yes, then they can potentially go to that register and say, hey, who owns this gun, and then go and buy it. But technically, they already have that when you bought it, assuming you didn't illegally transfer it to somebody else. And so if a gun that you bought in the past legally becomes illegal to own, they can go to that registry that they have, that if you bought that gun legally,
all right,
they already know that you own that you bought that gun legally. Whether you registered or not, they already know that you bought it. And so if they really want to try and get you for that gun, they can get that. The only way that they wouldn't be able to go after you is if you bought that gun long before this happened, any registration, of gun ownership took place at all, or if you bought the gun illegally, in which place you should not be able to own that gun if you bought that gun illegally.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I had an interruption. Can you guys condense what you guys supposedly said to me?
Well,
because I have to move a truck off a bed.
It's okay. We can wrap it up if you want.
No, that's fine.
It's late.
Just concise it for me, please.
It's late.
Well, registering your guns, basically, it doesn't cause any of those incidents that you're afraid of happening to happen. It might speed up the process of it happening, but it doesn't cause it to happen.
Look, any speeding up of that process, I would say any easement of that process, right, is a violation of my Fourth Amendment right, as I view it. Because for me, as a citizen of the United States, as in my assumption as a citizen, that I want, personally, how I view it, I want the government to come and to have, let's say, want to bring forth the evidence to prove my guilt, in a sense. And any forcible, let's say, acquisition or forcible, how may I say, forcible, yeah, I'll just say acquisition, but forcible retirement or forcible, shit, what would be the word?
That same argument, though, can be used against the registration of absolutely anything that we ever buy, including automobiles and houses.
So it says so the Fourth Amendment, just to be clear, says that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. So technically, you can't be searched and seized for something that you don't own. And so if you make it a process of the actual buying of the weapon or whatever item that you are talking about, that you need to register it before you technically own it, then that would be completely constitutional.
Well, no,
so I would say that
how about this? The ease of access for the government, right, to put you on a list, to say that you are, that.
But I could say that same thing for I don't want to register my purchase of my car because that makes it easier for the government to take it away from me if they decide that they want to take it away from me. That argument is a little ridiculous.
Okay, but that's
because
hold on.
The fact that registering makes it easier for them to seize my property. If they decide to seize my property, is not a valid argument.
No.
Other than firearms, and so therefore, I don't think it should be a valid argument.
No. It should be. No, because when it comes to my personal possessions, right, I should not have to give government should not have to give the government information that should easily access them for them to access my property.
I may or may not agree with you on that, Mikey, but my question to you is what protects you? What constitutional, what federal law, what state law protects you from that?
So if you look at how about this? If you look at the Fourth Amendment for secured in my property and my papers, right? My firearms are my property. Now, I am required by the government to register my firearms to show them that I have property. If I did not show them that I have property, right, I don't have to have paperwork to show them that I have these firearms, right? That in itself is an easy access for the government to come to my house and take my firearms and take my property.
But they have to have probable cause before they could ask you if you have more guns than what you.
No, exactly. Because they have to prove a case against my guilt. Everything that I give them is evidence against me.
That's fine.
That's how I see it. That's how I see it. Everything that I give the government is evidence against me for any case that they bring upon me. And so when it comes to the fact that I am innocent until proven guilty, the government has to prove the case against me.
Yep. And why can't they use the data that they've collected? If they used the census to prove you guilty of something, why would that be unreasonable?
Census is voluntary.
No, it's not. You are required to fill out the census.
I'm required to fill out the census?
Yes.
Why?
It's your civic response. It's in the Constitution.
Okay.
They hound you to fill that out, and I believe that technically you can get fined for not.
Okay. Fantastic. But how does this, Ryan? How does the census prove my guilt?
If they decide to make if we go like the direction of China,
no, you could have been committing
one child, two child policy kind of thing, and you in the census wrote down that you have 3 children, they can use the census information to come and take your 3rd child.
Okay.
That process is illegal, but that argument does not make the census illegal.
So
I didn't say the census is illegal.
That's the point we're trying to make. Any data that the government.
That is a hypothetical.
Let me explain how it would.
How does the census prove my guilt?
Because you could be committing mail fraud. You could be committing mail fraud. You put down you lived at one address on the census. You really lived at another, and then they find out that you lived at the other one, and they use the census data to convict you. That you aren't innocent. You aren't guilty until you aren't guilty before you've been convicted. They're using it as evidence at the trial once you're at trial to determine your guilt. They have every right to use whatever evidence they can find to determine your guilt.
But the thing is, if we're going to circle back to firearms, they will seize my firearms before I'm ever convicted guilty.
I don't believe that they should have the right to do that.
Well, they should not have the right,
that process is unlawful.
But they do.
Well, then Mikey,
that doesn't make registration unlawful.
Yeah.
No.
The fact that process is unlawful does not make the process of registration unlawful.
No. They use the registration to write the warrant to come to my house, to break down to my door, to take what I own, right?
But there are many other avenues that they can use other than the registration. The registration is not constant.
They don't need the registration to come to your door. The law is regardless of a registration. The problem is the law. The problem is not the registration. The problem is the way the law is written. And you have every right, once you have been wronged by the state of California, to take that to the Supreme Court yourself. You can go look through a law book
Supreme Court that will
for
take
free.
Years, that will take dollars.
You can go to your public library. You can go to your public library. Look through their.
That doesn't make the process illegal.
That A, it doesn't make the process illegal, and B, you can do it yourself. You can go to the library, you can look up case law, you can study everything, study how to go before the Supreme Court, and do it all yourself for the cost of a plane ticket.
Fantastic! I'm now inconvenienced.
Yes,
because
Mikey, you don't have the right not to be inconvenienced. There is no right for you not to be inconvenienced.
How about this? I don't have the right to be inconvenienced. Even though I did not break the law.
The whole point of the system, Mikey, the whole point of the system is that it's as fair as it possibly can be. And the way that it's as fair as it possibly can be is you have every right to go do it yourself. There is no other way for it to work in a more fair situation, because the government's always going to make a law that infringes upon your rights. So I have to be
sacrificed so you can hold your pedestal.
Yes, if you feel strongly about something, then you should take it upon yourself to fix it and to right it. It's not someone else's responsibility. It's yours.
Well, no. It's, how about this? That is in a world. How about this? That is in a world where, let's say that no one is inconvenienced, and no one who, let's say, does not break the law or perceived to break the law, but what you're describing, that's literally what you were describing. You were describing the fact that no one, that yourself.
In my scenario, people are wronged by the law constantly. Everyone's wronged by something at some point.
I'm wronged by the law.
Yes,
I am wronged by the law.
There is no system.
I should not be wronged
there's
by
no
the law
system in which that isn't the case.
And I have to put the extra effort.
There's no system where that isn't
myself
the case.
Innocent.
There is no system that isn't the case.
That's not right.
There's no system that isn't the case. You have the best ability to redress your grievances of any person that has ever lived in the entirety of the world. You have one of the strongest and most reliable justice systems where you can go before them and you can argue your case. And that is a fact. Okay? And you here, sitting here, imputing that system and saying that it's not good enough because it inconveniences you, disregards the entire sum of Western legal and judicial tradition that protects you and has probably kept you alive. In a lot of other societies, you'd probably be dead. I probably would be too. But the thing is, our legal and our judicial system is set up in such a way that for the most part, most people are very well protected. And yes, there are issues and there are problems with it, and there are mechanisms by which you as a citizen have the right to have the government redress your grievances.
How about New Orleans in 2004?
And they should have taken
hold on. How about New Orleans in 2004?
What about
when it came to Katrina, when they had their firearms under martial law confiscated?
And I think that each and every one of them,
they came back to get their firearms from the same government that seized them. The same government told them, "Oh, sorry, we don't have them."
And how many of them went to their local law library, started looking up the legal codes, and brought a case themselves?
I have to go to the library.
Yes, you have to do something to protect your rights. This is not some instance where the magical fairy of fairness is going to protect you. But fortunately, you have the legal right to go petition your government.
The government that's supposed to protect my rights is not protecting my rights. So therefore, I have to take it upon myself to face a government that's not protecting my rights to protect my rights.
Yeah.
Yes, and that has had to happen countless times over the existence of this country. I mean, the Civil Rights Act, the abolition of slavery. It was like the government was not protecting the rights of the people, and so the people fought the government to give them the protection of those rights, and then eventually they won out.
Yeah.
Gay marriage. Again, that's another thing. It was not a right that was being protected. In fact, it was being fought against very strongly, and eventually it won out, and now gay marriage is legal in all 50 states. Now, in 2018, that took a long time and a lot of people being heavily inconvenienced for something that was a right shared by everyone else but homosexuals. Yes, people get inconvenienced. people get mistreated, but there is a process to right those wrongs, and we have to work through them. You have to go through that process.
My question to you, Mikey, is what else should the process be? That we pick up arms against the government? I mean, that's fine. At some point, there would be a reason to do that, but that's the only other option. The only other option besides the legal one is force. And I'm curious what your
thing is at this point. How I stand is that I have committed I have not broken any law. I have not broken the law. I have been law abiding in this sense.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, every year or every 2 years,
when the government comes in, I agree.
No, hold on. You can say I agree, but the thing is that how I stand every year, it constrains me. Every year, it criminalizes me. Every year, right? I have to file more paperwork. Every year, I have to watch my door. Because nevertheless, no matter what happens, right? I, as a citizen of this nation, of the citizen of this state, as a citizen of this county, get sacrificed because I have done no wrong, right? I have abided by the legal system as it stands. And nevertheless, how the law is written in this state, they can kick down my door, they can take my property, they can take my rights, they can drag me out, they can throw me in a cell as they wish. And you can say that is wrong. They can say, but nevertheless, at the same time, you can tell me, oh, hey, you know what? You don't solve your problems? Go to the library. Go read a book.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that will help.
Yeah, it would.
But at the same time, it's hard enough to do that when I'm in a cell.
No, it's actually easier. We provide our prisoners with the ability to look up legal codes specifically so that they can defend themselves. It's amazingly fair.
I've committed no crime.
Mikey, I'm not saying that it's not a problem. Of course, the California state government...
It is a problem, and you are telling me that it is not.
No, I'm saying that... it is a problem if they do those things that infringe upon your rights. Registering your gun is not an infringement upon your right.
No, it is an infringement because it makes it easier to seize them.
How is that an infringement?
That is not an infringement.
That's not an infringement at all. An infringement would be keeping you from obtaining the gun in the first place. That is an infringement.
Which California does.
Okay, then take that to court.
Does not prevent you from getting the gun.
Then Mikey, what you need to do is go to a gun store, say, I wish to buy X gun. Have a record of you not being able to buy that gun because the California state government...
How about if the state prohibits me?
From what?
Okay, how about this? Let's say a Glock 41 Gen 5. If you look at the California gun safety, handgun safety roster, it is not on it.
Okay.
Because California, a long time ago, decided that it came up with a safety roster for firearms.
So a gun manufacturer or a gun store is not allowed to sell that to you. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Have you gone to a gun store and asked for this gun?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a record of that?
A record?
Yes. Did you record it? Did you ask the gun store owner for permission to record you asking him for this specific model gun? Okay. So what you need to do is you need to go to a gun store, get the clerk to agree to video record you asking him for this gun. Now, once you have been denied based on the fact that the California state government...
It's not going to happen.
Why? What's not going to happen?
Because California has the California handgun safety roster.
No, what he's saying is get a recording of you being denied the right to buy that gun.
You then
so
have
you can use that as evidence of you having your Second Amendment right infringed upon.
You have standing to go take that to the court.
Saying. He's saying do this so you have proof that your right was infringed upon because of a state law, and you take that to the court and you fight it and to get the California gun laws reversed.
Look, I'm not saying it's easy or something that you will be able to accomplish, but
that's if you want it changed, that's the way to do it.
Yes. If you're that upset, not fighting against a registration doesn't solve that problem at all, in any way, shape, or form.
All right, 1 second. I'll be back.
Anyway, Mikey, because I'm gonna have to go real soon.
Yeah, let's.
But I have one question on this note. So the Parkland shooting last year or this year, this year in Florida. The shooter
had an AR-15. He had 10.
But people called the police.
Yes.
To say that this person is dangerous.
Yes.
He is
29 times.
He's threatening to shoot up the school. Can you do something about it? And the sheriffs went. They called the FBI to report it, and nothing was done. They called the sheriffs, and the sheriff went to the house, talked to the kid or talked to the mom or something like that, and then left.
Yes. They went to the sheriff went to his house.
Hang on. My question for you: did law enforcement act correctly or incorrectly?
Okay. Well, how about this? They had 27 different calls, and Google had 2 calls to the FBI in this case. Now, I would say in this specific case, that maybe they did not act accordingly. Well, because this is past. Hold on, this is past the fact.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I don't know exactly the 27 times or the 29 times when the sheriffs came that they acted correctly or not. I don't know.
Well, the point is they did not confiscate his guns. They had received
well, how about this?
Accusations of threat, and they did not.
29 times they came when he was a teenager, when he was not able to buy firearms.
So again, this would be a place where a law that made sure to criminalize someone for losing track of their gun would have come into effect.
Oh no, I didn't say lose track of their gun.
Yeah, well, whose gun was it? Is he allowed to buy it?
27 or 29 times that the police came to his house was when he was a teenager. So he was not able to buy firearms. Now, when he became 18, he was able to buy firearms. Now, at this time, I don't know exactly when he became 18 to the point of the shooting, when the police came to his house. 1, 2, and when it came to the sheriff's department, they did not inform the FBI. It was Google Incorporated that informed the FBI twice through the subsidiary of YouTube, because he actually made threats on YouTube, making 2 specific videos that actually said that he was going to shoot up the school.
Yeah.
So when the event happened, Cruz was 19. So Cruz had been legally able to purchase a firearm for over a year.
Yep.
So he was a legal adult, legally able to purchase a firearm. When the police were called and the FBI was contacted to warn about this possible school shooter, and they did not take his gun. Did they act correctly, or should they have taken his gun?
No, I think they acted correctly because he did not commit a crime. So the thing is when you say that, okay, he shot up a school, and looking past, maybe they should have taken his gun.
Even though multiple people have said, even the law enforcement and FBI have said that they did not act correctly, that they had received credible threats.
Well, how about this? They only said that after the shooting.
Okay,
see,
so
how I stand.
I'm trying to get your opinion on that.
How I stand.
You say that they should not have taken his guns.
No. How I stand is if he's not committed a crime, right? If he's not a felon, this is the hard thing, right? It's the fucked up thing. It's the horrible thing in our system. When we have criminals that go out and do horrible things and notice before, right? But the thing is, the government cannot take your rights away, cannot seize your persons or your property.
It says unreasonable, by the way.
Well, unreasonably,
unreasonable,
but nevertheless cannot seize you as a person.
So the court has determined the court has determined that you getting 5150 is reasonable.
Yeah, 5150.
And that's what should have happened with him. He should have been 5150. He should have been brought in for observation.
We're looking at this after the fact.
No,
But when you look at this,
so
hold on. No, hold on. Looking at this before the fact, he did not commit a crime. He didn't have. Now, granted, he had evidence, right? There were calls to his house, to his household, mostly to his parents. I don't want to defend a school shooter, and you're putting me in that position.
No. I'm not asking you to defend a school shooter.
Screw you guys. But number two, screw you guys. But number two is that he, as a person, did not have a criminal history that I know about. And if the government didn't know about a criminal history, then guess what? Because guess what? He's innocent until proven guilty. That is the course of the law. As of me, I am innocent until proven guilty. And for laws,
so you're saying that because he had not yet committed a crime, they should not have taken his guns, and so it's okay that they didn't. It sucks that I'm not asking you to defend him. I'm not saying that you're.
No, you're asking me to defend him, and Ryan is too.
No.
I'm not asking you to do anything.
I'm asking you to defend the law enforcement's actions. That's what I'm asking.
Well,
I'm asking if you supported the way that law enforcement handled the situation or not. And that's okay. I'm not judging you either way. I just wanted to get your opinion.
The thing is that if the government has not have a record of you committing a crime, you should not be punished for committing a crime.
Okay.
And that's the thing, is that he did not commit a crime until he shut up at school. It's fucked up. It is horrible.
And so the threats, the potential threats beforehand do not.
Yeah.
Much
of that was to his parents. Granted. But number two, yes, it is cause for concern. It really is. Right? Mm-hmm. But then you're asking me, right, to prove a system that has failed, in a sense. So how about this? Shit. You guys give me one moment. Is that granted?
I want to wrap it up. We're really late.
I think this is a good point first, and we've been talking for quite a while.
Yeah, shit, because I have to use the restroom
Yeah.
really bad. But no, it's like, so you're asking me to prove a system, right? So in other cases that has failed. So in Texas, there was a church shooting where I believe there was 60 casualties, right, wounded and dead, for a man who was dishonorably discharged from the Air Force. That wasn't recorded. And so when it comes to the Parkland shooting, the thing is that when it comes to the Parkland shooting is that he didn't commit any crime before then.
But he did have a history of mental instability.
Did he?
Yes. He had a recorded history of mental instability. He was not 5150'd, but he did have a history of mental instability. He was on medications. He was, but he wasn't classified an immediate danger to himself or the people around him, which is the 5150.
And the other thing is, threats are illegal. There is a threshold under which a threat becomes illegal. So if you are threatening credibly to harm other people, that is illegal.
The thing is that hold on, the threat was reported. But the threat was reported.
Threats have to be specific enough, and the threats that recorded were not specific. The threats were recorded was basically, from my recollection at least, is that he was just saying. I hate to take this
position.
So basically,
I hate to take this position, but if I don't make a credible threat, then should the government take down my home?
I would say that if you're threatening anything and you own a gun, that should be considered a credible threat.
But the thing is, if you're the yelling fire in a crowded theater argument, this is what legal precedent has said, is that in order for a threat to be to not be protected by your First Amendment, it has to be specific. So just saying I want to shoot up a school is not specific enough to be an actual threat. If he had said, I want to shoot up this school tomorrow, that is a credible threat, and that is not protected by the First Amendment. But just saying, I want to shoot up a school, is just like saying, I hate you, and it's like, I wish you were dead, or I want to kill you, is not a specific enough threat. I mean, as far as like, there's a lot more complicated to that, but basically that's how it is in order for it has to basically be a specific enough threat in order to not be free speech, to actually be a criminal act. And so from my recollection of the news coverage of the incidents is that when he was the threats that he gave when he was saying, when he would, like, the videos of him was just saying, I want to shoot up a school. It's like, or I want to be a school shooter. I don't think he even said I want to shoot up a school. It's like, I want to be the next school shooter or something like that. Which it could be argued was not specific enough to be counted as a threat. It was just like, well, he's just saying stuff that's atrocious, but not actually threatening a school.
I would
a specific action.
I would suggest that the action of saying those things and buying a gun should constitute a legitimate threat.
I personally agree with you.
Right.
It's just not been that's not been a legal precedent.
I don't know why everybody did he say why he was leaving?
He had to go to the bathroom.
Okay. Yeah.
And I don't know why the other guy got left. I think he got bored.
I think he had to go to the bathroom too. Okay. So I'm just let's wrap it up. We've all said that we're about ready to wrap it up, and both of my co-hosts have left. So thank you so much for
now.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I think it's surprising how much we agreed on things. Well,
from my perspective as a liberal living in a very conservative city, it's not that surprising. Because I've found a number of people that when you actually start talking specifics, when you actually start getting down and dirty, getting to the brass tacks of politics and legislation, it is pretty easy to find a middle ground.
Well, and I think it's important.
Not always, but it's mostly when you're just shouting headlines or just clickbaity catchphrases, relating to a policy. That's when it's the biggest divide.
Yeah.
But when you actually get down to the execution or the real specifics of policy, right and left do have a chance of meeting in the middle.
I agree. And I think we also have to realize that you have to look at what the law says and what the Constitution says and a number of different things. But before you can start saying that the government can or can't do something. And I may agree that we want to limit what the government can and can't do more than what it already is, but there's very clear ways in which you have to go about accomplishing that. And I think it's very important that you do things the proper way. The reason why we're in the state we are with California is because the California state government has decided that they don't want to do things the proper way, and that they don't want to get rid of the Second Amendment because it wouldn't pass. So instead of getting rid of the Second Amendment and doing things the proper way, they're illegally, infringing upon your rights to keep and bear arms. So, just because they're doing it the wrong way doesn't mean that you have the right to do it the wrong way too. You have to go about it the right way, and you have to speak in the right terms. Mm-hmm. And you have to also.
But this is. I apologize for my absence, but this is the reason why I've been so adamant and more or less, I have to say, hostile.
I would agree.
And to my guest on this is that I am personally affected, and those that I know are personally affected when things are gone the wrong way. And so when we bring up, like, let's say, when I left, we were talking about the Parkland shooting, right? The Parkland shooting, we can talk about all the things that everything has done wrong, but when you look at, in many cases, when what we consider has done wrong, or when the government has done wrong, right, the individual, yes, he might have, let's say, a mental illness accusation against him, but nevertheless, that individual was not committed a crime, And so when I look at the government, right, proving me guilty as a citizen, right, I would want them to prove me guilty of a crime.
I agree.
Right, have evidence against me. So the state has to have, as a citizen, evidence against me in a court of law to prove me guilty.
Would you say the same thing about someone who has a tie or connection to a terrorist organization? They have not committed a crime yet, but they have connections to terrorist organization, terrorist organizations.
Well, how about this? If they're a U.S. citizen, right? If they're a U.S. citizen, and they say they have a tie to a government organization, I would say in this case, as in many cases, unfortunately, that they have the right to due process. And so if you're going to expound upon that to the government using drugs to kill U.S. citizens overseas, right, I think that is wrong, because as a U.S. citizen, you have a constitutional right or wrong, to face the court of law. That is the system that we have. It's a system that we should always have.
I agree, and you have to fight to protect it. And so when you are wronged, you have to take your grievances to the court, and that's the proper way to do it.
The thing is how I feel. All right, this is not an observation. This isn't backed by evidence. I will adamantly say this, that how I feel when you tell me that when you're wrong, you have to do all these things. The thing is that I should already have those rights of protection.
Here's the thing: you have the protection of the court. That is the way the system is set up.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you're. So what are you asking for? Okay, Mikey, when you get mad at me because I say that, what are you asking for? What do you want to happen? The government not to have made the law? They already made the law.
I'm asking
it's going
to be
to
left
happen.
Alone. I'm just asking to be left alone. That's all.
I agree. And the only way that you can get that is if you take your own responsibilities into your you understand them, and you understand what you need to do, and what you need to do is go out and fight. Okay? That's your responsibility. You have your rights. They're being infringed on. When your rights are being infringed on, your responsibility is to defend them. So how are you supposed to defend them in the United States? Well, thank the Lord, we have a robust criminal justice system that, while is very complicated, but it is you are definitely capable of studying and putting in time and effort to figure it out and to go take care of the issue yourself. If your rights have been infringed on, it's your responsibility to everyone else who also has their rights being infringed on to go and fight for yourself and for them. That is the system we've set up. That's the best it could possibly work. I cannot think of a better system than that, because you actually have the opportunity to. Rather than the Nazis just coming in, taking your guns and shooting you in the back of the head, you can go to the court. You can go to the court. Everybody agrees you can go to the court. Nobody's going to stop you. That's the way the system works. What different would you want? Honestly.
No, the difference is to be left alone.
I agree.
But if you're not left alone, if something happens, what are you going to do about it?
What we can do about it?
Because you can't guarantee you're going to be left alone. Whether we add new laws, take away old laws, change current laws, if you are not left alone, what do you expect to happen to be done about it?
Well, I expect, as Ryan has put, frankly, if there is a robust criminal justice system, but nevertheless, how I perceive it, how I've seen it, how the laws are written, that I will be imprisoned, that I will be charged guilty of a crime, I will be a felon, that I will be in prison behind bars, and yes, I may be able to have the easier access of the resources to fight my conviction, that I can go into prison and I can look through all the books and I can read all the words and I can flip through all the pages, but nevertheless I'm still a felon. Nevertheless, when I go to court, that I'm still a felon, and nevertheless when I go to court and I present my arguments in my case, I'm still a felon, I'm still convicted of a crime, most likely it will be overturned, that I will still be put back behind bars for a crime that really I didn't commit, but it was a crime in the state of California because California deemed it so.
And then at that point, you would be wronged and aggrieved, and there's not a whole lot you can do.
I will be wronged and aggrieved like
but you
many
haven't gotten
others.
to that point
No,
yet.
no, hold on. I'll be wronged and aggrieved like many others and still be put through the system and still not get compensated and still get spit out and still be shown that I am a convict, that I am still
But that hasn't happened, Mikey. That has not happened to you.
Not yet, but it could possibly happen.
Lots of things could possibly happen. A wild boar could hop through your window. Are you upset about that? The problem is that you're getting all emotionally upset over something that A, hasn't happened, and B, once it does happen, you have plenty of paths and dozens of organizations across the country that will leap at the chance to protect you. And even if they don't, you have every right to go and protect yourself and defend yourself. And you have a significantly higher chance of being able to do that than anyone previously in human history before 1776.
And you're also getting all emotional on a hypothetical that is a bit far-fetched. Because I mean, you're saying
I'm not even
like you're a convicted felon
far-fetched.
just for buying a gun legally buying a gun that is now illegal to own.
No, that is a reality. That does happen, and that is something we should be concerned about and fighting against. And I completely agree that we should be doing those things, but you have to do it properly. And getting upset about it.
But the thing is that I have to spend my time now to do so, right?
Yes, everyone has to spend their.
Cool. But I work all day. That's the thing, is I work all day. And then when I'm at night, yeah, maybe, but lawyers' offices are closed at night. But then I have to work all day. See, and this is the thing that maybe you did not factor in, is that I work all day.
Everybody works all day. That's everybody's problem. Everybody finds, anybody that gets something done finds time around it. And just because you do what everyone else has to do. Okay, everyone else has to work all day too.
Doesn't mean that you should be exempt from the rest of the process.
I am not exempt from the process. The problem is it makes it hard for me to get into the process. That is all. How about this? Go into the process or pay my bills. Because I can tell you this. This happened to my father. Go through the process or pay your bills. Go through the process or pay your taxes. I know that. I've seen that. It does not work well.
Well, I can't speak to the specific situation that you're referring to, because clearly something has happened that I don't know the details of.
No, the process leaves people broken. It leaves people broke. It leaves people back in debt. It leaves people in debt to the government and debt to other financial institutions. I've seen that. I've lived that.
All right.
So, no.
Well, I appreciate.
I do not want to live that. Now, granted, you could call me emotional. That is fine. I am. I will admit that. But you know what? The system does not work for everybody.
I agree. And I think that's a good place for us to end it.
I think so.
Thank you very much, Will, for joining us.
Yeah, and, thank you, Will. I apologize.
I appreciate the discussion, Mikey, and I apologize if I offended you.
No, it's all right. Don't apologize.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I hope you have a great evening, everyone else that was listening. We're going to sign off.
Thank you guys for having me on. This is a great discussion. It went a lot longer than I was expecting it to, but I think we covered a lot of topics. We went from foreign policy to domestic policy to the upcoming elections and finally gun control. That was probably our most heated discussion, and oddly enough, probably the thing that we actually came to the most agreement on.
To a certain extent, I would agree. Thank you very much again, and good night, everybody.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, you have a good trip to Colorado. Hope to see you soon, homie.
Yeah. Thanks, Mikey. I'll see you in a week.
Yeah. See you in a week, homie.